A Doooovid here. We're live again. Shavua Tov, just after Sabbath, Saturday night, a few days before Passover here in Metro Detroit. I have Jennifer, Church of Entropy, joining me again for another stream on the coronavirus COVID-19 situation. This is the third week, third time we've done this. The fourth week. So that's been about 3 weeks since the shutdowns in my areas and the school closures, and when it was just a few infections, and God forbid I'm going to show the numbers, probably right away. But now there's already over 500 people dead just in my area in Metro Detroit. Hospitals are full. We're going to talk about what's going on. So anything you want to add, Jennifer, or should I just jump right in?
Thanks for having me, Doooovid. Great to be here. Looking forward to the stream. I've been keeping on track of all the different developments. It'll be exciting to hear what you found. Sounds like it's a lot of research into the more medical and scientific aspects.
Well, I spent the whole week myself just researching this, almost like 10 hours a day, and so there's a subject of virology, the science of viruses. And I'm going to show some recommendation lectures or even free courses you could take. And then there's, epidemiology, the study of disease that could include viruses. There's a lot of related fields that are, actually quite complicated fields of, biology, graduate level research, even that most doctors don't go into. So your average doctor probably knows something about viruses and virology. But it's a huge subject, and all these different fields, especially what we call like molecular biology. And I took organic chemistry. I didn't take in university officially molecular biology or even biochemistry. Later on the internet, I took some courses in that, but it wasn't the same structure as formally taking it to be working with these chemical formulas. But I'm going to try to show today basically the limits of what science knows about this subject in the most current research and statistics and numbers and ways of looking at this, not from the medical perspective. I'll leave that to the doctors, although I've been watching quite a bit of that on my own. But just in terms of the science, what's going on, what do we understand about viruses and this virus and what's happening? And then I have a lot of social data on economical impact, technological impact, the precedents for shutdowns, the history, and your various ways of looking at it. And I have a lot of charts and data and a McKinsey study. I have enough data. We could go for hours and hours and hours just presenting data because, the whole world is just basically shut down, and all that anybody's doing is thinking about this situation.
Yeah, it's kind of coming in waves, eh? I don't even remember the first time I brought it up about the virus because it had been on 4chan for a while, but having seen so many of these things come and go, I knew that it was more or less pointless to talk about it before a certain point because no one would believe me anyway. So I just I don't like those fights about, whether something's relevant information or not, but when enough people picked up on it, yeah, it just sort of spiraled from there. And the weird thing was that there was the whole oil market flooding thing that happened pretty much at the same time, which is when the media seemed to really start shilling it. So it's a very complicated situation, but yeah, it is seeming to be. I mean, it was pretty predictable what was going to happen if they do the shutdown. Obviously, the cities are going to be impacted worse, and just the nature of a city and everybody being so tightly packed together, right? Is going to cause there to be more spreading and so forth. So a lot of what's happening now would be easy to predict, but people may not have believed it at the time, unfortunately. So yeah, your viewership's back up to 11, and I imagine it'll pick up because I think what was happening with YouTube was for whatever reason, my suspicion was it was some type of bug, not a bug, but how sometimes stuff gets programs get frozen or whatever, people's streams just weren't showing up on subscriptions, so nobody was getting notified in time about streams. I think it's been resolved now, so your viewers are coming up to normal levels, so that's good news. And I've noticed it as well myself on my own subscriptions. It seems to have been resolved. And that other thing was resolved that you were talking about, the that suggestion I made about Zoom changing their default settings. You said that they had updated that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, why don't we discuss all these things tomorrow? And I'm just going to leave this exclusively as an information session on COVID-19 and not even too much conversation on philosophizing. I just want to present useful information and leave it up as a stream that people could go to and look at for information or review myself. And we'll talk about all these things tomorrow. So I got the screen share going. So let's look at, first thing, and I'm going to put a bunch of these links in the chat if they're useful to other people. So here is Oakland County in Michigan. This is where I live. And, so now they have a GIS Global Information System map that you could click on. And I live in Southfield. And actually, I live in what looks like the second most infected place in Oakland County, the suburbs, and it's actually the Orthodox area that has the most infections at 236. But we'll see, what's going on in Detroit, where my parents live. There's 37 cases, 0.23% of the population. So almost everyone has these data out there. They're across. There's questions like racial data. So we're seeing like in Detroit, it's way worse. So this is my area. Here's Michigan. So I was just showing you Oakland County, and my father's medical office is here in Macomb County. And you could see that it's slowly been moving north from the city. But the bulk of these cases in Michigan, 14,000 plus cases, over 500 deaths, are coming from Detroit. And it's turning out that African Americans are suffering from this the worst. So here's okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to get most of these links. I close these up. Here's the thing I've been showing, just the 17-year-old Jewish kid from the West Coast who programmed to filter the data up, and you could see that it's going up 100, over 100,000 people, a day. 85,000 more infections today. We're already past 1 million, 65,000 dead in America. God forbid we're going to be approaching 10,000 deaths by the end of the weekend, God forbid. And President Trump said it's the next 2 weeks, the experts saying, is likely to be the worst. And even in Italy, if the curve is flattened, we could have 2 weeks of, God forbid, over 1,000 people dying a day. And even here in Michigan, for whatever reason, Michigan is the third worst state. We could reach a period here in Michigan, God forbid, where we have hundreds of people dying every day. Our hospitals, we're already setting up field hospitals. I'm not going to talk too much. We'll look at some of the data, but I'm sure people are seeing this all over the place. So here's again Oakland County. This doesn't have the map, but you could see they have the male-female ratio, and there's also the number of people. I think they changed it to the people that end up in the hospital or dying, which is much more significant at older ages. So a bunch of useful information. If anyone's local in Michigan watching this, I'm gonna put that in the chat. I have a ton of information, so I'm just going to try to clear some area. Here's just like a Pew survey, and you say actually these shutdowns are popular in America. That your average American is in favor of these shutdowns, Democrat and Republican, and the threat to the economy, threat to the health. More people are scared about it being a threat to the economy than their health in America. And then you could see that there's very widespread support between Democrats and Republicans for most of these measures, and even things like requiring businesses other than grocery stores and pharmacies to close, that even the majority of Republicans support these. And, obviously the question of how they view the president, but it's not going to be too much of a concern for today. Here's your, New York Times now they have maps, the countries. So they have interesting data here besides the, country map. Here you have where they're rising the fastest, how quickly it's taking to double. So in some cases, they were doubling every 2 days. And there you can see color coded. So I'll put this link in the chat. So there's just a ton of information. I'm going to have a whole bunch of slides that look at this in a various way. But here's the free service and the increase from the New York Times. So here you have the areas that have it the worst, the most cases by state, but they have, and also you could see this spreading the fastest and kind of like where these curves are going to be, where this would be like so the numbers are still increasing, but the rate of the increase in the numbers is decreasing. So it might be like your second derivative or something that would show you these inflection points. But here, so like New York, you have it was in the red, and now it's already going down where the rate of increase is decreasing. And even here in Michigan, they say the rate of increase is already decreasing. They're saying that it was doubling, like every 2 days, and now it's down to doubling every 3 days. And in New York, but at the amount where they already have over 100,000 infected, even if it doubles every 4 days, it's going to be, God forbid, millions of people in a few weeks.
Yeah, when the second derivative is negative, that's called a saddle point. It's usually an indication that things are about to level off, hopefully change direction. But you have this additional sort of variable of not really knowing, well, it's two variables. It's not really knowing how long the thing's been around for, / not really knowing how effective the quarantine was, / also a third one of how many asymptomatic carriers there are. There's a lot of question marks. So
yes,
even
I'm
if
going to try to present.
Down, it may go up again.
Yeah, I'm going to try to present basically all the data that we have. And, obviously there's a lot more data that could be had that would inform the situation better. So, here, like 30,000+ cases a day in the U.S. the last few days. Started with a trickle. See New York, deaths in the U.S. So as the data comes in, so here was interesting. Here's your counties with the highest number of cases per resident. So Boise, in Idaho, they had like I guess the African American group of like skiers had some party there, and that caused some huge outbreak. DJ Jazzy Jeff, if anyone remembers, the original music partner of Will Smith, it was at that black snowboarders party, and then Rockland County is actually an Orthodox Jewish area. Westchester is an Orthodox Jewish area, and then a lot of these are probably going to be African American areas, and so that data is going to come out soon. So why don't I let Jennifer talk a few minutes while I prepare the next batch of stuff I'm going to talk about.
Hey everyone, hope everyone's having a good day. Yeah, I'm not too sure what I should talk about right now because I'm not sure where you want to take it, Doooovid, but I'm checking out the stats there. It looks like there's 17 people watching, which is great. I see John Gishla. Nice to see you there. And yeah, so there's information coming through the chat about China researchers saying they've discovered a new chronic mutation in a patient who was contagious for a record-breaking 49 days. Yeah, so you hear a lot of these crazy statistics, but it's important not to get hysterical and maybe not repeat things that could be disinformation, right? Hey, what's going on, Spacepan? It's very hard to validate sources. So like what Doooovid is doing is helpful because he's actually looking at statistics, right? So no matter what misinformation may be out there, statistics are more difficult to fake. So that's why we tend to take the tack of meta-analysis or statistical analysis, even because it's harder to misrepresent the situation when you're looking at large-scale data. So what we're seeing is basically consistent with what you would expect with this type of outbreak. You know, it's going to be saturated in the cities, but there's also going to be a large number of uncounted cases. So there's often more question marks than answers, which is why they want to do this. I mean, may just be putting off the inevitable, but at least the hospitals will be able to get up to spec with regards to the ventilators that they need, because that appears to be a bit of a bottleneck problem, that some places don't have enough ventilators and people are sort of rigging up their own ventilator type things. And yeah, so there could be some problems there.
It's a state of panic where, it seems that they say that like 80% of people end up on ventilators die. That, so I'll just talk about ventilators in terms like, just kind of saying, the people in these positions of power, when people die, they get bothered about people's families' care. But generally from society, it's like, okay, people die all the time. And, JF's statistic where he's questioning, just how bad is this pandemic? Does it warrant the measures that we're taking? So I'm just going to try to give the best overview of the current state of knowledge, and not too many of my opinions tonight. Maybe afterwards, if it's conceivable to finish all of this. And there's so much information, and this is really taken over all of society. So, basically, there's aspects of, every aspect of life has been affected by what's going on with coronavirus. And because it's, a virus, and it really requires the best of combination of all the forms of science, because you're talking about something that is almost at the molecular atomic level, extremely small, that takes the most extreme of our technology just to have a feel for, what this thing is that's doing this to us. And then you're going to see all these unknowns. So like, I want to present, that, people know the Doooovid's multiple truth hypothesis, but people should, leave this, having a good feel for what are the unknowns, what is the, the scientific consensus, what is kind of this expertise, what's this history of how this consensus among experts formed, that this is the response that we're taking, and the thing, its relation to vaccinations and evolution. And I'm going to go, into great detail to show, evolution. I learned how to use this web page. So I've prepared my next tranche of information. So, anything else to add, Jennifer? I'm going to restart screen share.
No, go ahead. I'm just tuning in.
Okay, so there's just a ton of information. So I'm going to put these in the chat. Like hopefully other people, if they follow Doooovid or Church of Entropy, they probably love science. So here's a web page, Pine Biotech, that has some very good information about understanding the genetics of and how to use these web pages that I'm about to show, that show the genetics of it. I'm about to show that this web page that I showed before on JF, that I'm sure people are familiar. So I was able to find a video of this woman who's a PhD student that did her internship for NextStrain, specifically for SARS-CoV before this broke out, and did a nice video tutorial. Overview of her work, but the video included a tutorial of how to use the software. And, so anyone who wants to learn more about it, this was one of the better videos I found. Britt Glossinger, head of a department in University of California, Berkeley. And there's some great slides. I looked to see if, she made the slides public, but saying like, what do we know about this virus? What are its genetics, what its mechanism? And we actually know quite a bit. I'm going to show you actually that we know basically the whole genome. So we're going to be looking at things like this. This is like, the proteins, the various different, the 27 different proteins that this virus codes for. And, but if people want to know more about virology and the type science that's required to understand viruses, this is a good 101 video. Here was another good video, and this also dealt with some of the science behind the the cures and the zoology and the groupings. So anyone who wants to learn more about the subject of virology, there's some very good quick videos. I was trying to find out the origins of the 6 feet thing, and it seems like it's basically random. Here's a book on the mathematical modeling of infectious disease, and it's funny, the logo looks kind of like the logo for that chess variant I play, Crazy House.
Yeah, I showed you earlier. I looked it up, and if you sneeze, it can go up to 8 meters. So 6 feet is completely arbitrary. It's probably just a placebo thing.
Well, no, I'm going to assume that there's some sort of percentage model. So, I mean, Wikipedia has a formula that the formula says from this book that I just showed on Amazon that I didn't buy, but, like I might if this continues. Here's the JAMA network that had the one that's, showed that it could go 27 feet. And they actually have some interesting videos, affiliation with Yale University and papers on the subject. But the JAMA network was the one that had done the study years ago about the 27 feet. But there's probably some sort of percentage of effect of the further you stay around distance. That your R factor that they're calling, that we talked about, the rate of spread, how many people that one person spreads to others, there's probably some mathematical formula to show how that would vary with distance. And I don't know if there was an optimization to turn 6 feet, or like a simple explanation, like in the Bible, an amma is the distance from your elbow to your end of your forefinger, which is about 1.5 feet. Which means, the Bible, you have this concept of 4 ammas, dalet ammas, which is your personal space around you, which is about 6 feet. So it could be relatively arbitrary, but, so I didn't buy that book. I might, and I have more information on it. These are booklets. I actually downloaded a lot of these. There's thousands and thousands of pages of booklets. But these are, the National Academies of Science and Engineering, and they had, booklets over the last few years of the policy about what they recommended to do in a pandemic. And I'm going to show some more of this in the official thing. So a lot of what we're doing right now is actually directly in line with the recommendation of what our experts have been saying for decades. And then you think like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and these billionaires for charity, and they're trying to do things with their money to, so to say, better the world. And like the I don't know what happened to Gandalf, but you talk like the UN and the resolutions of sustainable development and getting rid of eradicating disease and worldwide vaccination type things. So that's one of the most important things according to these UN principles, is the eradication of disease. So a lot of your big names and charity like Bill Gates are, that's one of the main things that they do, and even Mark Zuckerberg. Here's I found a lot of information. This guy, Vincent, a Columbia professor, and Vincent Raccinello, and he's got This Week in Virology, which he's got this little kind of like spooky opening he's been doing for years, the kind that make you sick. But he teaches a course at Columbia University, and he's got a YouTube page. He interviews, relatively the most famous experts in virology, and he's been teaching the same course. And the PowerPoints and slides are available as the YouTube videos, and the very different years. So I mean, here you're talking 26 lectures, from what is a virus to the infectious cycle, genomes, genetic structure, attachment and entry, RNA, directed RNA synthesis, transcription and RNA processing, viral DNA replication, reverse transcription and integration, assembly, infected cell infection basics, intrinsic and innate defenses, adaptive immunity, mechanisms of pathogenesis, acute infections, persistent infections, transformation and oncogenesis, vaccines, antivirals, evolution, virus ecology, emerging viruses, HIV/AIDS, unusual infections, therapeutic viruses. So this is would be a upper level course, undergraduate course in virology, maybe a similar course that someone might take in medical school. And this happens to be one of a world-renowned expert, a professor at Columbia University, who's made his classroom public. So anyone who's interested, in fact, I just ordered a textbook. He has authored a textbook on virology, but I ordered a different textbook, not his textbook. So that's my tranche. So let me show this New York Times article, and then I'm going to look at NextTrain, and just to to show kind of like the entropy and what we know about evolution and the virus, and then we'll look at some statistics and then a whole bunch of information. And like this is kind of only like 10% of the information I have to present. So there's just a ton of stuff. So this is the New York Times article. Carl Zimmer has written books on viruses. I was looking for good books on viruses, and I came across Carl Zimmer. So he wrote this thing in the New York Times. And, basically, we know the whole RNA sequences. There's only about 30,000, RNA letters, so to say, base pairs in the coronavirus RNA. And it looks like there's only one RNA inside each virus cell. And that virus codes for 29 different proteins. And I'm going to go much more in depth in this. And this has a little explanation for the various proteins. So, like you could look in the lectures. I'm not an expert on genetics. I've taken some courses online. You would understand like your 3-5 strings or whatever. But the virus enters, the RNA gets put into a protein in the cell, and that protein will produce this protein, like some sort of 27 different proteins that the virus directs the cell to produce. And from those 27 different proteins, that's how the virus replicates and takes over the cell. And the first part of the virus is to this part over here, the ORF-AB protein, is to kind of take over the cell, and then these ones at the end are the units that are going to be the structure for the new viruses. And so here you actually see the whole genetic code of the virus, and this is going to be important to go into NextTrain. So I showed this with JF, and we looked at this before, where it says here's the original virus, and these are actually samples. If you click on these, you could actually see the whole genome of these viruses. So these are time-stamped. So when you're clicking at it, here you have number of descendants, and I have to look up all the information. I'm not sure what all of this means, but basically these are locations and places where they collected a sample and they made note of its genome. So here you have China, and you have the date, in the confidence interval, from possibly when it could have came from. That could actually be 3 weeks. But you have a basic location that the virus was taken off a certain person in a certain area. Where they got it from are a bunch of unknowns. And then you have its genome here. And the various branches are variations in the genome, which is going to be a mutation. And we're going to see that's actually entropy when we look at this. So you see that here is going to be where these mutations occur, and they actually occur at regular places. Most of the mutations that, for whatever reason, the mutation, if you see actually, show entropy, is they call these mutations entropy because according to the scientific understanding, it is an entropy which causes mutations. The reason you can't have a perfect replicator is because of the second law of thermodynamics of entropy, and therefore they actually have rates that will determine the maximum number of replications on average without an error. But these errors can be tracked because we have thousands and thousands of samples of people who have been tested for this virus, and they took the genome, and God forbid, we'll probably talk about tomorrow, not tonight, whether it could have been a bioweapon. Saying like, well, we have, that people, infectious disease experts have samples of these previous specimens, from and a lot of times they keep them and test them and grow them to do them. But so let's just kind of show a little bit of what the technology here. So here you have, as said, this is like the ORF1A and 1B proteins that are like the proteins that are used to take over the cell or build like a macro protein. And then you have the S, which is the spike protein, and then various structural proteins at the end. And from 0 to 30,000, these are the base pairs. So starting here, 0 is the very first letter in the RNA till the end. And these are mutations that, for whatever reason, the mutations aren't equally distributed. The mutations occur at regular intervals. So when I click on this here, you see it actually gives me, so this is codon, has an exact number of, it's usually around the 11,000th, 81 to 83. That's the position on the RNA strand. So we know exactly where this 3-digit codon is in the RNA strand. And we know generally where the first location of this mutation was, and then you could follow regionally what's happened since. And then these pie charts here will show in the different area of the strands of the virus. And I guess this would be in one person. That I said, when one person gets infected, like you don't, God forbid, get infected with just like one virus. Usually you get infected with maybe thousands or millions of viruses, because if you get one of the particles that has viruses on it, it's likely to have quite a few of them. And so you could see the percentage of the various ones that have this mutation or don't have this mutation, and you could go through the click on these and the various ones. So here you could see that this mutation here, and this is in the structural protein, actually became dominant. So at some point, like in China, this was a P instead of an L. That's how they're demarking the base pair. So I have to, I guess, as opposed to the DNA. But the first ones in China, that base pair was a P, and then at a certain point it became an L. And in these places, as opposed to the other one, the first mutation I showed, there seemed to be a mixed batch where you found both varieties. This mutation appears, to happen. We know exactly, seemed to the first time it appeared, when it appeared, and then it becomes dominant to almost all of the ones in those geographic regions have this new mutation. So, and you could actually click on these ones, and it'll take you to another screen that will actually show you the whole of the genetic code of that one. So it's quite a bit of information. I showed it before, and there's probably a few interesting things, and maybe tomorrow we'll discuss the interest, the concept and theory of entropy, where they actually call the mutation here is actually referred to as entropy.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, I guess when the mutations happen, they're going to a higher state of entropy, so that might be predictable based on chemical entropy. But yeah, what's the next slideshow you wanted to look at? Did you want me to talk for a bit while you go get it?
I have some up, so let's look at some statistics. And so I got the most latest. Is this showing on the screen share? Can you see this?
Yeah, it looks like it. Yep.
Okay, so if you remember 2 weeks ago, I showed these data from Statista, and so here's the updated information from the most latest that I got earlier today. And we have the infection rate, fatality rate, cases, recovery worldwide. So I had to download this, and you have to actually set up an account. Try to figure your way out if I could just click to go to the next page, or I got to scroll down. I don't usually use this browser. So here, sorry about that. So here you have a comparison of infection rates. Yeah, so the first, okay, apologies about the boomer tech. So infection rates of viruses involved in outbreaks worldwide compared to SARS, MERS. So we're going to look at further ones, and we'll talk about that later. So you see the fatality rate. We showed this before. This is no different from the one that we showed before. But COVID, even if it's at 2.2%, God forbid there have been ones that are much more fatal. But how well what spread they are in the H1N1. So there's a lot of data that we don't know yet. But total cases now are well over 1 million. A few 230,000 recovered. So this data is well known, just showed in a few different ways. Regional, where God forbid Europe has been the mass majority of cases. That even though it started in China, over half of the cases are in Europe, and a quarter of the cases in North America. So definitely wasn't expected when it was first started in China that the vast majority of cases would be in Europe and North America, but that's the way it's turned out. And you could see, the beginning China was at the top. Whether you could trust those numbers or not, we'll see. But now you look at the the numbers: USA, Italy, Spain, Germany. Could be there's all of these countries are going to be over 100,000 soon. So this is yet to be known. So we're going to look at the projections and how people make these projections. See the deaths, God forbid, Italy's almost at 15,000 already. So China now isn't even in the top 5 of the most deaths from this. And even states like Michigan could be rapidly approaching thousands of deaths in various states, like across Michigan, across the U.S. If you divide it, this is an important number. They say the deaths per 1 million people. It's one way they measure things like gun deaths and accident, various things. So in Italy, that's already approaching 180 deaths per people, which is still like 0.2 of 1%. But the infections are well over 1% of population in a lot of these places. My area certainly are already infected, and the death rate is close to 0.02% in Italy, and over 1,000% in Spain, and increasing fastly across the board. Active infections. A lot of these are just duplicate. There's so much information to get through. New daily cases. We see that in the U.S. 77,000, Italy 30,000. No, I'm sorry, that was in the U.S. 27,000. There's just so much information here, but a lot of this is repetitive, and people, if they want to look this up, could get these information. So let's just look at the graphics, not the numbers. So just looking at these daily new infections, it's still going up. It's eventually probably going to approach some sort of bell curve shape, and experts are saying that the apex of this bell curve is probably in about 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, like this daily number, if it still going up at this rate, will likely be hundreds of thousands of people, could even be millions of new infections a day. See at the duplication rate by the time we reach the apex. Here's if you divide it up, and you see that North America and Europe, by far the majority of the cases, at least from what we know, we're going to look at evidence like temperature and certain evidence that it performs worse, or even statistically, like in a half-life type measurement, connecting that to like every increase in 5 degrees Celsius. So I try to look at some of those, but we've been looking at this for a few months now. So here's how scared people are. This was as of March 1st. So, okay, this data is a little bit old, going back to March 14th, so that's not new. So here's most worried about the pandemic. So here in the US, like, we're really starting to worry. 70% of people are really worried, which has been increasing by tens of percent. So, I mean, some of this data is a little more or less interesting than other. I have so much to present that that's probably all I'm going to be able to show from that. Actually, I have much better slides than that, but that was just the. I might come back to this later. We're going to look at immigration, the connection to immigration. So let me show this, 2 more slideshows real quick. This is actually from Palestine, just to show this concept of social distancing and how these plans have been around for a while. This is in 2008 from someone in Palestine. But talking about influenza preparedness and social distancing strategies. So I'm going to not going to go over most of these slides because I have so many. But this was a different virus than the coronavirus, the influenza virus, which actually is similar to the Spanish flu virus. Here's a question: 35-year cycles. I have better data here later that's going to go over the history of pandemics and the various ones. But are we due for a major pandemic in cycles? So they've already, the experts were already warning about this. Risk, threat times the vulnerability times the consequence. Transmission is likely the same. They thought of influenza as coronavirus, and that they're moving more and more towards changing. Like just talking. Can you get it just through talking? So those have been. So it's interesting here. This is already like a category. We're only questionably a category 2 pandemic. I mean, we're only in a category 1 pandemic. So if you think 2008 in these standards for the severity of the pandemic, and category 1 is projecting less than 100,000 deaths, and for category 5 you need more than 1.8 million deaths. So I mean, it's projected. So they're saying projected, if we didn't take these measures, it would have been a category 5 error, pandemic, and maybe we could mitigate it to a category 1 or 2. But I'm going to show some actual. I'll actually show the book from the U.S. The 100-page booklets that they've put together. And we'll look more at the Spanish flu, where it's saying like this data from the World Health Organization, like they've been preparing for this a long time, and these various phases. It looks like now we're acting on slightly different data. They probably changed it in this kind of pandemic period. What happens after the pandemic period, where the pandemic period is just where you got to assume that everybody has it, it can't be controlled, and then this concept of what can you do about it, and this idea of social distancing. It's been around before, and shelter in place, alternative to quarantine. You have reverse quarantine. These concepts of why social distancing, who infects whom. Children usually infect other children. Adults usually affect other adults. You're most likely to catch the disease from someone in your own demographic. Kind of these social networks of who you talk to, who you might infect, versus when you stay in place where you could only infect the people that you're in place with. Also the education level, kind of like, should you wear a mask, should you not wear a mask? But like, well, they should wear masks, but people don't know how to do it. So there's this information gap. So it takes a certain amount of time during the pandemic for people to start taking it seriously and be able to adapt to the behavior that's needed to survive it. So just kind of like a simple slides of various levels of complexity. So just showing that that was just a professor in Palestine from over 10 years ago talking about these type things that we might likely have to do during a pandemic. So I have the McKinsey briefing materials. This is probably the most in-depth thing I have. I'm not sure if I should save it for later or just go straight forward with the McKinsey numbers. We got Claire here in the chat. I think Jennifer's still here. I'm not sure. She took a break, or so I think I might just.
Sorry, no, I'm still here. I just I'm not sure what to say. I mean, if you want to look at that one, we can, or move on. That's cool.
Okay,
I'm not
you're
sure.
monitoring the chat.
I can monitor the chat, sure, but I can't see Claire because I have her blocked. Is she out of line again?
No, I am not. No, I don't see it. I'm not sure if there are any questions. I want to focus almost exclusively on the coronavirus here, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
Go forward. So here's McKinsey, and I've used McKinsey in the past, and they're one of the great research companies. Business advisory, and so this isn't going to be so much on the science of it, but just a collection of numbers and outlooks and societal things, and so I have all types of various information. But McKinsey is I guess considered from near like the gold standard of financial advising. Global humanitarian challenge, resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, reform, these type business things. So we're going to look at the situation now, scenarios and path forward, sector-specific impact, and planning and managing responses. So we see, this was just made yesterday from McKinsey. It's the most up-to-date information, so we don't need to see a little bit of their graphics, but this I'm going to have on all different type slides are going to show the same information, but you look at the cumulative cases and the various countries that are being hit the worst, numbers, even countries like South Korea possibly, what do they do about it? We'll look into more of that data later. Let me put this in the chat, so if anyone wants to look at this or read these things, there's a lot of information there, and I don't think it makes sense for me to read all of this, but we could go back to what happened. Washington, February 29th, declared state of emergency. March 11, suspend travel to Europe and UK. President Trump, March 16, 15 days to slow the spread, which, ironically, the Jewish Community Forum comes out just before that, like March 14th, in the way that, God forbid, a lot more Orthodox Jews, had that happened a few days earlier. So karmatically, that full moon of Purim came out a day that it spread to, probably the most likely day of the year for it to spread among Jews. So you could, these dates and things are well known and shown in other places. So they're saying the number of new cases, claiming that they're trending to slow down, that there's been some slowing down, and these are numbers like in Italy of, so in the US, we still on the curve of increasing. In Italy, it's possibly that they've reached their maximum, although they're holding pretty steady at, these huge rates of infection, but it looks like they've reached their apex. And, South Korea, a lot of uncertainty of, China, so there's a lot of uncertainty in these numbers. So, but encourage people to look more into that. Growing evidence of asymptomatic cases and transmission from, how easy is it to transmit? Seasonality, questionable what effect the seasons are going to have on it. Testing, is Asia ready to restart? So here's a little history on asymptomatic cases for transmission. The terms of the warning. When did we realize that asymptomatic people could be the ones spreading it, and the various studies that are trying to show what percentage of these cases, and it could actually be the majority of cases are being spread by asymptomatic people, but that still is not been conclusively determined. And new evidence showing that seasonality is unlikely to affect the growth of this, as seen by how it's spreading around the world in various places now. The different types of testing, and we're going to look more at these. So there's molecular testing, there's immunological testing. We're going to look exactly how they test, if they have like a reverse transcription of an RNA strand, so they could match and see if the virus's RNA strand or certain chemical triggers that might be triggered by the virus and the various things. So I might have to skip that. There's a lot of information in the testing that I might, you could seek that information out from people more qualified than me on that issue. Here you have the restarting of economies in Asia. So there's a lot of information. Let's see the scenarios and the path forward and the sector impact were the main things I thought that were interesting in this. So you suppress the virus, expand treatment and testing, find cures, safeguard our livelihood, support people and businesses affected by lockdown, prepare to get back to work safely when the virus abates, prepare to scale the economy away from -8 to 13% trough, as shown that right now we're looking at close around a 10% shock to the economy. And here's various scenarios about how quickly the virus will be mitigated, and how quickly the economy could get back to work. So it's there's a lot of unknowns and uncertainty. So in the business world, you have to manage your risk, or in any realm you're in, you have to manage your risk, and you have to look at the possible scenarios, and have some sort of strategy that is looking at the most likely cases, but also assessing risk if it's some of the more worst case scenarios. Impact could exceed anything since World War II, and you could look that we're already close to World War II, Great Depression numbers in terms of so here you had scenario A3 and A1. So I guess A1, virus resurgence, slow long-term growth, as opposed to A3, which is virus contained, slow recovery. So question, do we completely defeat this virus or not? So the various scenarios to how bad the economy, could it be as bad as World War II or not? And also the question about the worldwide impacts. Does it start regrowing in Asia, re-hitting China, impact on GDP in the second quarter? You see China, US, the world, these just a few percent, but we'll see the repercussion of having a negative GDP. So here, this was the scenario, virus contained, we're looking at minor GDP. So here would be a scenario, if the virus is long, you could have substantially worse hit on GDP. So there's various questions that will affect how bad this is going to be. There's what they're going to call the depth of the disruption, the length of the disruption, and the shape of the recovery. So these are all kind of nice graphical things. I'm not sure you have any comments, or did you want to explain how we're looking at this depth, length, and shape of disruption and recovery?
What would you like me to say about it?
just something useful for people trying to understand these concepts that, where we're looking at certain scenarios of what's going to be coming over the next few weeks. So we're saying, graphically, it depends on the depth of the disruption, the length of the disruption, and we say the shape of the recovery. So in depth of disruption is just how bad is it? How many people are going to die? How much of a society has to be shut down? Is it to affect critical infrastructure? And length of the disruption, which could be related to the depth, but just as how long is this going to last? And then the shape of the recovery, between what relationship between the depth and length, for how that would look on a shape is these various graphical projections.
Yeah, well, the market basically is a question of what people are willing to spend money on, and when there's a huge shutdown, like what we're seeing right now, and it does make it very hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. But yeah, those three factors that are listed up there are the important ones to consider. We've already seen a massive drop in stock markets. So there's been around 30% loss, but it started to recover. Who knows if that'll last? Length of the disruption, again, it really depends what the experts say, when they give people the okay to go back to work. And then the shape of the recovery, again, is down to how quickly people can get back to a point where they're confident spending money. So it's sort of maybe impossible to go back to the old economy that we had, because now that it's been disrupted, people are going to start making alternate arrangements probably sooner than later. So it'll be harder to get that exact same economy going again. And we're seeing some countries, I believe it's Russia, China, and I think Saudi Arabia, are willing to trade oil in a different currency than the U.S. currency, which is a big news for sure. It shows that they're departing from the petrodollar standard, which is really sort of a cornerstone of the modern economy. So it's unclear, and the only thing that's obvious right now is that the recovery is going to be long.
Yeah, so let's look at the sector specific impact. And so you're seeing the percent impact of these various things, where aerospace, air and travel, oil and gas is almost fell in half, banking by 30%, automotive to things like pharma, which is also taking a hit, basically a bit hit across the board, but some things like retail, pharma, healthcare supplies, office goods haven't taken as much as a hit at things like oil and travel. And there's a lot of variance between different companies. So if you look at the 90 percentile range, where the range of the various companies within that, so like aerospace, some are losing 20%, some 60%. Oil, some are almost down 80%. And then you look at, even though everything is down across the sector, things like consumer services, pharmaceutical, healthcare, some high tech, some of those are actually becoming more profitable right now. And I'll actually have some slides collected on how to make money during this, and how to invest in various things that so you could see that just because it's down across the board, there's quite a bit of variation in it. Hardest hit sectors, so commercial aerospace, largely due to pre-existing industry conditions that made them vulnerable. Air and travel, oil and gas, all related. Automotive, just related to the shutdown. People aren't traveling that much. Unlikely time to buy a new car. Insurance carriers. So that's related to reduced interest rates. Some more information. So I encourage people to read through this, because I have so much to present. I'm not going to be able to go in detail about the projections for these various industries. You could see oil and gas. If you're looking at demand, So you have the, this muted recovery, the A1, the A3 scenario, both of those scenarios looking at a long-term reduction in air travel and energy demand. And, planning and responsives. So I encourage people to read through these. These might be hard to read. So employees, so the companies should invest to prioritize, protect their employees, different measures. And I have more slides that will talk more exactly about like what employers are doing to companies are doing, trying to get people to work from home, terms of, blurred boundary between work and life. So there's a lot of various information in things we'll probably talk about in Week in Review tomorrow, more in depth, but just kind of cover these. So, looking, reset and calibrate, activate key levers, read and respond. Different, McKinsey does largely business consulting. So, we're looking at supply chain. You have intermediate, mid-level, for the next 1 week to a month to the next 3 months, various things that if you had institutions that you were running, you would have to consider your short-term and long-term planning, resilience, just a basic big business device. I'm not going to go, I guess, too much into too much detail here. Here's some, percentages. Yes, I'm just gonna have to recommend people read through this. I didn't study this enough to present it, but so let's just keep it going. Did you want to let me stop the screen share and I'll hand it over to Jennifer a few minutes while I get my next tranche of information.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? If there's any questions in the chat, now's the time to ask them. I just been paying attention to what Doooovid's saying. A lot of information there. And yeah, so a lot of people are saying they think they may have had a case of it already and things like this. Ali's telling us he's not able to even smell bleach. So it's apparently something that can affect your sense of taste and smell. So what appears to be the best way to do preventative measures is zinc and vitamin C, just to start that. And chloroquine has been shown to have some good effects. So that may be something going forward that they can use to stomp it out. But again, it's hard to make predictions at this point because we don't even know what data is valid. What are we going to be looking at next, Doovid? What type of the
slide? First 2 weeks I covered more of the basics, just how to avoid it, the how it transfers, what you could do to avoid getting it, the risk factors, the signs, the symptoms. Saying if you could have a common cold, your season's changing, you'd be sick from many different reasons, and even if you are sick right now, even if it was a similar symptoms to COVID, it's still a reasonable chance that it's other related sicknesses. But you could check the first 2 weeks where we covered that in the information. So I want to be repetitive. So let me show some of these papers. So I'm not just because I really there's so much information. So I have a bunch of slides from SlideShare that I found. But some just good information out there for people who want to know more. So I was looking into the effect on immigration, and I think I found little slides on this. So here's some of these protections that have been put into for immigrants, or what do you do? What's going to be the effect of immigration related to this, and the health of immigrants, and the current state of the law. So that's an issue that requires further research. So I did read through a few studies on that. But I'm not going to be able to just read from these long articles because there's just so much information. JF was talking about, is social distancing effective? So I was looking through some of the scientific data about social distancing, and it's somewhat inconclusive in the fact, like the evidence from the Spanish flu, and we'll look at that. So, here's some studies that look into, what does it mean for social distancing? What are the various forms of social distancing? In terms of canceling schools or certain size gatherings, and they don't really have like the number of feet you stand away from each other. I couldn't find like a study where it compared like how far you stand away from each other. But it is something that I encourage people to read. Hopefully, people are more academic, because there's just an overflow of information. So here is our official, the United States official strategy for pandemics. So we said, like, we do have, like Dr. Fauci and guys like this. Even I was in, related fields of construction. Even just construction, you had to know a little bit about pandemic preparedness. And this from 2006. The last century, 3 influenza pandemics have swept the globe. 1918, the first pandemic, sometimes referred to as Spanish flu, killed over 500,000 Americans and possibly 20 million worldwide. 1/3 of the U.S. population was infected, and average life expectancy was reduced by 13 years. Pandemics in 1957 and 68 killed tens of thousands of Americans and millions across the world. Now we have a new threat. This was we're dealing to the H5N1 influenza A. So therefore, they had a national strategy for pandemic, the influenza, but you'll see that they prepared for influenza, but it's similar to what we're using. So the U.S. government planning and response describes a unique threat posed by a pandemic that would spread across the globe over a period of many months. The specific and coordinated action to be taken by the federal government, as well as its capabilities and limitations in responding to the sustained and distributed burden of a pandemic, and the central importance of comprehensive preparations at state, local, and community levels to address medical and non-medical impacts with available resources. You have international efforts, transportation and borders, outlined steps it would take to work with our international partners to prevent, slow, or limit the spread of infection globally and in the United States, and describe proposed measures for effective management of our borders and the transportation sector during a pandemic. So protecting public health and protecting animal health, the law enforcement, public safety and security, institutional considerations, so you see these concepts of social distancing, measures. So I encourage, hopefully a few people will have time to read through this. But you're saying, so the United States did have an official strategy for dealing with these things, and a lot of stuff we're doing now that the experts are recommending is in line with what the experts had recommended previously. So here is just a journal Advanced Research article coming out recently. I have a lot of slides that, do better with the slides, and there's just not going to be enough time for me, like a public study session, to just read these scientific articles. This really isn't my expertise, in this field to present stuff. But here's pretty good information on the science. See the table, comparative analysis, the reservoirs, where it comes from, its genetic structure, how it functions, a little bit of graphics. So I encourage people to read through these. Here's one a little more complicated. Encourage people to read this one also on RNA genome conservation, secondary structure, in viruses. And this one actually, said has the whole RNA strands, and will show like I was showing that New York Times graphics by Zimmerman, and you see the overlap between the various SARS viruses and their families, and then you could see the breakdown of its genetic structure. And this one even will have some of the molecular structure, chemical energy, to really understand all the science of the virus at the deepest level, and what the various parts of the RNA code for, and some of these structures. What are these proteins that the virus may look like? What are their chemical structures? So this is already molecular virology. Here you have the various segments of it and their exact base pairs. So here you have molecular virology, genetics. So someone like JF who has expertise on the subject. Unfortunately, I don't have expertise on that subject. I have just a cursory understanding that will allow me to know what the current state of understanding of science is, but not much more than that. So I'll hand it back to Jennifer, and then maybe I'll try to prepare a few slides.
I think one of the things that's making it hard to interpret this data is that we don't know what the origin of this thing was. And I don't really know that I don't know if you can really prove the origin, but it would be nice to see some data that actually pointed to something. I mean, experts can't even agree about whether it was made in a lab or if it just jumped the species barrier between a bat or a pangolin, as you said. So it's hard to know how to interpret things if we don't know the actual origin. We don't even know what country it was originally released in, because there's accusations flying everywhere. I think it shows a lot of, immaturity on the part of the governments that are pointing the finger. It kind of makes them look guilty, I think. So I'm just really looking forward to seeing some validated data, and appreciate what you're doing so far to show us what's out there. What are we going to be looking at next?
Yeah, and saying really, we don't even really know what the viruses are. We talk about like evolution and various concepts, and even like, what is a virus? Is it alive? Is it not? And the reality is we don't really have good answers to these questions. And just these questions like social distancing. How is it possible that the World Health Organization keeps on changing its guidelines, where one day we didn't need to cover our face and now we do. One day it could, it couldn't be transferred just through talking, and now maybe it can, and these various things. And you see the limitation of what the experts actually know. And so why don't I'm going to do right now, I have 4 slide shares. Some will be repetitive, related to the science of 3 slide shares related to the science of the coronavirus. Let me just do this one because it's the quick one and just get it off my desktop. So look at just a quick one about impact of COVID-19 on EU and Italy immigration policies. So travel to EU countries has been banned, at least temporarily, until April 18th. So I'll put the link to this in the chat, but so just what's happening to the new laws for entering and leaving Italy and the EU in general. What do you have to do? Self-declaration, working need, a ban from leaving Italy. You can't travel on your own. Although residence permits have been extended, so people that may have had the residency ended during this period of time have had that automatically suspended. And overstaying visas, 90-day allowance. So just interesting information. You're not necessarily here or there. Just it was one of a short one. Let me just get it off of my desktop so I can move on to other things. here is something I had to download this from the Migration Policy Institute. Immigrant workers vital to the U.S. COVID response, disproportionately vulnerable. With the COVID-19 virus spreading rapidly within the United States, workers in several key industries are at the front line of keeping U.S. residents healthy, safe, and fed. This includes not only doctors and nurses, but also custodians who are cleaning hospital rooms, checkout clerks at grocery stores and pharmacies, scientists racing to develop treatments and a vaccine, and the people who grow, harvest, and transport food across the country. Immigrant workers are overrepresented in a number of these occupations that are vital to the fight against the coronavirus. While foreign-born represented 17% of the 156 million civilians working in 2008, they accounted for larger shares in some of the frontline occupation, 29% of physicians, 38% of home health aides, and 23% of retail store pharmacists, for example. So I'm not going to read through this, but just see some of these numbers. So healthcare, all workers, 18.72 million. Foreign-born are over 3 million of those. So just the various professions and what percentage of the people that fill those: scientific research and development, 22% of those, transportation, bus, metro, and taxi drivers, 34% are foreign, manufacturing, food, medicine, soap, cleaning agent, 26%, agricultural, forestry, fishing, 27% foreign workers. And you have things like registered nurse, nursing assistants, personal care aides, home health aides, 38%. So, some of these numbers are staggering, the role that immigrants play in our health system that we've discussed in the past when I've debated issues like immigration, even in retails and sales. It's question, what effect is this shutdown going to have on the economic impacts of immigrants, hard-hit industry? So interesting. So Julie Galat, Senior Policy Advisor, the Migration Policy Institute. So thanks for that article. So just delete these. I got these other books. I'm not going to have time to look at these, but I downloaded these books. I showed this scientific research and policy, and these are the lessons learned for outbreaks, the readiness for 2030, going back years. And I'm just going to delete these, but I got thousands of pages of these books, and you just try to look at the table of contents here a little bit, but you could download these for free. I had the link at the beginning. From workshop. This is back in 2009, right after the H1N1, that people were really worried about the next pandemic, and came up with these plans and papers. I downloaded 4 of these books, and I'm just going to delete them. I really don't have time to read them because just too much information. But so preventing transmission of pandemic influenza and other viral respiratory diseases, 2010, personal protective equipment for healthcare personnel. So there was planning in line, but very few people read this. Like people who studied epidemiology, maybe were supposed to have read these books and these plans. So only the experts in epidemiology had really read through this stuff. And I don't, here's emerging viral diseases, 2015, so, there were certainly plans in effect. There were ideas, people who had thought about these things and knew it was important and had implemented ideas and plans. And, maybe people like Dr. Fauci or something that, had probably read these reports, or various people, but it wasn't such a great field of knowledge. So maybe over the coming weeks, if this continues and we see the effect, it'll pay to go back and look at these books that were our preparedness. How do we try to prepare for this in the past? But that may be beyond Doooovid's ability. So I wanted to look at the science of vaccines in general, the history of pandemics, and a data-driven approach to what we know about coronavirus. So let's just pound through these three. Let's look at the history of vaccines. You good, Jennifer?
Yep, just tuning in.
Okay, so vaccine, Edward Jenner's used for first cowpox, comes from the Latin vaccinus, which actually just comes from cow, which was the first way to protect against smallpox, where he infected people with a lighter form of the disease in cows into children, and those children proved to be immune, and that was before we even knew what viruses were. So a vaccine is any preparation intended to produce immunity to a disease by stimulating the production of antibodies. Vaccines include, for example, suspension of killed or attenuated microorganisms, products or derivatives of microorganisms. Most common method of administering vaccines is by injection, but some are given by mouth or nasal spray. So, look up the history of Dr. Jenner and the first vaccine for cowpox. So I'm not going to have time to tell that story. Familiar with that story, Jennifer?
No, I'm aware that vaccines existed in India or something similar to vaccines that worked. So I imagine it was just an advancement on that technology that the modern vaccines are.
Yeah, although they're unlikely to have been administered in the medical way that Jenner did, with injecting the disease from a cow into humans and then the humans building up immunity. The concept or some of the idea may have existed. So the idea is to build up the immunity system by injecting the person with various things, and they could be they could be with a vaccine. It's some sort of biological preparation. They have what they're called live attenuated, or which are organisms which may have been passed repeatedly in tissue culture or chick embryos, so that they have lost their capacity to cause disease, but retain an ability to induce antibody responses, such as polio, measles, rubella, mumps, yellow fever, BCV, typhoid, and plague. We'll see that we'll look at all the vaccines that are commonly given across the world today. But basically they're a milder form of the disease that they're worried about catching. And so you get infected with a milder form of the disease, and then that should build up the human immune response. So that if, God forbid, you get infected by the actual disease, you will be immunely prepared. Then there's inactivated or killed organisms, which may have been killed by heat or chemicals, but retain an ability to induce antibody response. They are generally safe but less effective than live vaccines and require multiple doses. So that was the original form of polio or influenza, or rabies, Japanese, certain sicknesses where they inject you with inactive forms of the virus that can infect you, but they could possibly cause an immune response. Cellular fractions, usually polysaccharide fraction of the cell wall of a disease, causing organisms such as pneumococcal pneumonia or meningitis. And there's recombinant vaccines produced by methods in which specific DNA sequences are inserted by molecular engineering techniques, like DNA sequences spliced to a virus grown in cell culture to produce an effective influenza vaccine, and hepatitis B vaccine by similar methods. So the passive immunity, you have toxoids or anti-sera, which could, just certain toxins that could be injected that might prevent the disease. You have immune globulin, antibody-contained solution derived from human blood. It's being talked about in the news. You have antitoxin, antibody derived from serum of animals after stimulated with specific antigens. So if we had, the type chart, you have a little bubble, but as the pandemic is spreading and then immunization starts. So the red is the pandemic, the blue is the number of people, being vaccinated. And as the number of people vaccinated goes down, there'll be a drop in the number of cases, and then usually there'll be the second wave as it nears zero. People stop getting vaccinations, and there's a little bump. So we said the first vaccine, the timeline is Jenner for cowpox. 1882 was the first vaccine for rabies. Rabies, I guess, used to kill lots of people. I've heard history courses on these, but you just because there's so much information. But you could see, a whole century of first vaccines for these various, mostly viruses. Going till recently, there's always new viruses and new vaccines. So we look at like 9 million children under 14 die each year from infectious disease. At least 1/3 of them could have been saved from existing vaccines. So that's why like WHO, Sustainable Development Goals, the charity funds by like Bill Gates, you're always focusing on these millions and millions of children that die from things that supposedly they would have been all right had they got the vaccines. So here, example in the Western world, a civilized world, we might have up to 12 different things that the average person is vaccinated for. And a lot of times these shots are coupled into one. Some of them you get like a period you only need once when you're a child, or a few periods of years, and some of them you need a few times. And some of like the flu you might get yearly, but up to this point now there's already 12 of them, and about 6 that have been basically used all over the world no matter what. So I'm not going to cover this too much. The testing for developing a vaccine, the period, say it takes like 18 months, just because the time, but the stage of the development, the testing and the different size of the testing and the various things. So good vaccine, creates a good immune response. It's safe. It doesn't have too many side effects. It's stable. It's going to work over a long period of time, and hopefully it's cheap. You look at children, like diarrhea, a lot of people believe is caused by viruses or these other things. That a lot of deaths in children are coming from likely viruses that might be curable by vaccines. So looking over the worldwide killers, this is 1998. So you see already like COVID-19, 1998 killed over 3.5 million people. This influenza, pneumonia, things that cause respiratory infections. So already millions of people every year die from these respiratory viruses. And you have AIDS, diarrheal diseases. So God forbid, a lot of those are transferred through fecal matter in places that don't have sanitary restrooms. Tuberculosis, malaria, and measles. Malaria and measles still carrying about 1 million people a year. There's bacterial vaccines. So I'm not going to. Rotavirus causing diarrhea could cause up to 2 million deaths in younger people each year. So we have vaccines for these. Most people, like some people don't vaccinate their children, but most people are scared of these various sicknesses, and therefore will have their children vaccinated, and can be even legally required. But all different types of vaccines. So let me make sure that I put this in the chat for anyone who wants to read through all this stuff. So there's just too much information to go through all this information. But you can see there's a lot of various vaccines and in various diseases all over the world. There was some more slides I wanted to get to here.
Yeah, I just sent you a message on Facebook. There's some preliminary vaccines for the novel coronavirus that have been tested. If you want to take a look at that at some point.
Okay. Yes, let me get through these slides, and maybe we'll cover it tomorrow, just because I have more information than I could conceivably get to just with what I've already prepared. So a lot of these focus in Africa or Southeast Asia. So here you have DNA vaccines are experimental. So it would be some sort of like insertion of a DNA or a strand that would code to make certain proteins, kind of like a reverse in the same way a virus that takes over the cell to make protein, that you might be able to insert like DNA to genetically engineered vaccines. So it's an interesting thing to look for in the future, but I just have so much information to present that that's all of this topic I'm going to be able to cover. Did you want to, I'm going to pop it. Was there something you wanted to add?
I just thought it would be interesting that the University of Pittsburgh reports successful COVID-19 vaccine trial. Just thought it would be a piece of good news. People were interested in that.
Yeah, there's tens, maybe even over 100 various potential things that might you at least slow the spread, if not be a cure, potential cure. They're being tested, and they're going to fast track the ones that look like they have the most. And God forbid there's so many people sick, so the hydroxychloroquine is actually being tested here in Detroit, because there's so many people that are sick. They could do a clinical study of thousands of people here in Detroit with hydroxychloroquine. And so all over the world, because so many people have this, they could probably do controlled studies. So, city of Worthington. I don't even know. You know where Worthington is?
It doesn't ring any bells.
Okay, so they just had some nice slides on pandemics. So this was the book I showed earlier, the National Strategy for Pandemics, this specifically influenza. So you have endemic, a disease that occurs at a high rate in a given population; epidemic, outbreak of a new cases of the disease in numbers that exceed what is expected; and pandemic, an epidemic that spreads worldwide. Throughout
Looks
history,
like Worthington is a town in Hampshire County, Massachusetts.
Okay, so just whatever a university or came up with some pretty good slides. So you don't have time too much. Toward the plague of Justinian, the Black Death, the typhus outbreaks in the 15th and 16th century, smallpox till the 18th century, where you had Jenner. A lot of these were believed to have like ticks on rats. Influenza, it's been around for, together with humans. Influenza pandemics happen about every 30 years. People were expecting another influenza pandemic, but we got a coronavirus one. And although it could be this winter, we had a specifically tough flu season, which likely could have been related to influenza. We look at the Spanish flu, the great pandemic. I think that's why I wanted to show these slides. Then you have the Asian flu, that even the Asian flu in 1957 killed 70,000 in the United States, and the Hong Kong flu killed 35,000 people in 1938. So this famous Spanish flu in the modern era is the biggest pandemic, possibly worse than the Black Plague even. Some people estimate as many as 100 people died, caused more deaths than World War I, II, Korean War, and Vietnam War combined. High rates among young youth and young adults, coupled by the traveling of people returning from World War I. It had a first wave in 1918 that disappeared in the early summer and then came back. So the first wave, unusually high mortality rate, was not clearly recognized. It was unclear, like a few 100,000 people died. It was just after the war. There wasn't that much communication. And then the second wave, they believe it mutated. The flu viruses mutate actually much more frequently than coronaviruses, which are bigger viruses and have like some sort of proofreading mechanism that other viruses don't have. And the new virus wasn't recognized by population's immunity system, and it was probably more deadly than the first, and possibly more contagious. So it reappears at the end of the summer. The beginning of 1918, it started to, the epidemic dies out, and then at the end of the summer in August, it appears simultaneously in multiple cities around the globe and mutated to an exceptionally lethal version. So here you have maps of, September, where kind of like here in the U.S., God forbid, these maps were, just 1 week, a few dots sparking up, and then it's in, and then a month later, it's all over the country. Hundreds of thousands of people died. And you'll see October is, one of the biggest deaths. 90% of the deaths occurred during the second wave. It's actually Detroit News would strike 30 to 50% of the world population. 10% developed massive pneumonia. Of those 10%, 60% of those died, leaving about 6% of the people infected. And death could occur within 24 hours of the massive pneumonia. So you look at the statistics, the death rate that October, huge death rate of 50 people out of 1,000 people. It meant like, still only 0.5%, but 0.5% of the population died in America in October. Just a huge number, unfathomable that just 1 out of 200 people died that month. So have you done much research into this 1918 Spanish flu pandemic?
No, I haven't, but it's interesting to see how it affects things. So yeah, that's quite a high number. You said 1 in 20 people died. Is that right?
No, at the end of the day, I think like 1 in 50 people died, but there was this one really bad month in October where like 1 out of every 200 people died. So just in one month of October, 1 out of 200 people died. And over the whole course of the pandemic, possibly 1 out of 50 people died. And so the Black Plague was worse in terms of, maybe even 1 out of 3 people died. So here's some basic information that's other. So the Asian flu, the Hong Kong flu, that you still at this point killed more people than this pandemic, but likely COVID-19 will overtake these ones. So causes of death, although they're all respiratory viruses, that they kill people in slightly different ways. Pneumonia. So more diseases, Legionnaires, and you have huge population difference, that the world travel, just various things. Encourage people to look through the slides too if they want to learn more about it. And then there's a lot of just generic information on viruses that I encourage people to look at. And this information we covered somewhat last week: incubation, systematic recovery. Avian influenza. Okay, so one last one on the actual science of the disease, and then I have a whole bunch of stuff on the cultural and economic effects. So here is Professor Chen of Bioinformatics at the University of Alabama put together some nice slides, and data-driven healthcare biomedical informatics perspective. So we've got epidemiology, virus classification, the protein sequencing structures, virus infection, host cell specific functional genomics analysis, data-driven healthcare model for pandemic diseases. So a little more about the science. So these this also had some nice pictures. Comparison. Spanish flu, Asian flu. So at this level, we're not even near the swine flu yet. The swine flu likely killed 600,000 people, and that was like less over 10 years ago, which caused a lot of our preparation, and a lot of the reason we're reacting is because of the swine flu. But so at this point, God forbid, they're predicting it will be worse than the swine flu. We looked at the R values, this probability of transmission per contact. So when we talked about social distancing, it'd be like the 6 feet way. So you have contacts per unit time and duration of infection. So this probability of transmission per contact factor in the R factor would be related to the social distancing, and possibly related to like the feet, like if it was 6 feet, if it was 3 feet, if it was 10 feet, would change this P factor that goes into the R factor. And we'll see like measles has the biggest R factor of all of them. I guess it's because it's very small. Hepatitis, which I think they think comes from even like kissing or sexual transmission. It's very low R factor from the respiratory diseases. So here's like the box that it might go into for the range of this R factor that we're unsure about as of now, and also the fatality rate we're unsure of. Okay, so we've seen the risk factor increases, possible transmission jumping between animals and animals and humans, and we can review, hopefully talk more about that in more scientific pontification than just giving over useful information. So transmission paths, possibly inter-hospital transfer, people getting infected, seeing these graphs from like infected to who ends up hospitalized to who ends up recover. So, a lot of different graphs on this. Some more of the mathematics of modeling, where you have susceptible, exposed, infectious, recovered, into even turning into differential equations. So some of the modeling software that I showed with JF for the previous week, likely had these differential equations programmed into it, how they were modeling it. And here we're looking at these kind of charts in China, and they're corresponding it with the various actions that were taken for lessons learned. So epidemiology, I bought a book on virology, a university textbook. So you have a virus family, and there's various types of viruses that are put into your various families, just like any other ones. We talked about the entropy, the mutation rate. So RNA viruses in general have about 1 mutation, 10 to the 4th. So it's pretty high, about 1 every 10,000, meaning for every, so that means you might have as many as 3 errors in a coronavirus RNA. I mean, I think coronavirus is a slightly smaller. So COV substitution ones are smaller in scale by 10 than your average RNA one, but still, so you see some of those numbers that have been determined, and these various virus families. Here you have more on the genome of the various proteins that the RNA sequence codes for. And here you have similarity between SARS-1 and SARS-2 genetically in the various parts, how similar. So you have your beta CoV and your SARS here in red. So the protein, the structural protein that gets the process kicked off versus the spike contents. You can see the similarity between SARS-1 and SARS-2, SARS and COVID-1 and SARS and COVID-2 genetically, and you might even see more these exact genetic mapping, or what is exactly different, if it was likely to tracing the origins. Like, we don't even know where it came from, how it came from. Did it, it could have, God forbid, have been man-made, could have been someone experimenting on SARS-1, could it have involved animals, could have happened naturally, was it the food market? So as of now, there's just a huge amount of unknowns, but the novel beta CO2, has this changing of the receptor that makes it much more easy to spread the change in the spike protein. Or in addition, where it becomes much more different than SARS-1, that makes it much more likely to spread. So here, whoever made these slides are claiming that the pangolin is not going to be the host. There's a lot of similarity between the SARS COVID that's in the pangolin, but it's not a match, and it's unclear if there's any connection between the SARS virus and the pangolin and the Wuhan market and the one, because if it is a match, we should have been able to locate it, because I guess you have pangolin, and pangolin, have a certain viral load. A lot of, people have viruses in them that live their whole life. So any person at any given time, like a swab, could have multiple different viruses. So the SARS-CoV is not likely to be deadly to pangolin. So any given pangolin, you could, do a viral spectrum analysis and locate these type viruses that exist in it. And it's unclear, although they're very similar, 99% similar to this one, that if it was, the cause of it, that, we should be able to find more of a match. So it's the closest answer that we have yet, but they're starting to try to rule the pangolin out. So you have the case of, you have the patient 0 from the seafood market, and some sort of genetic analysis of mutations and variations to try to locate, was that the first person and how it spread from person to person. So that's being put together right now in these studies. So more on this DNA protein and analysis of the SARS, the various proteins, and this peculiar cleavage adaptation to the spike protein that's appears to have changed from SARS-1 to 2. And even when JF was first, that people thought that could have been genetically engineered, and originally when it first happened, in order to God forbid, it's a bioweapon, because that they took some of the best things of the HIV virus and the SARS virus to but more on this will turn up over the next few times. So I gotta say, I have to do more research. I'm not understanding all of this data, but just showing this is graphically representative of the best of the current knowledge that we have of the virus right now. So more diagnostics, like we got a lot of swabs, we have a lot of tests, we could get DNA, RNA samples of millions, there's hundreds of millions of people, over 1 million people infected. So, obviously this could be one of the largest scientific data gathering things ever. Okay, so some of the use of artificial intelligence, and going to be more on that and interesting information. Okay, how you feeling, Jennifer? How long have we been at this? About 2 hours?
Looks like we've been going for 1 hour and 49 minutes now, and yeah, I'm doing good. I'm not sure how much I can contribute unless you have specific science questions, but it's fun to listen to. So yeah, I'm down to keep going.
Okay, so over 10 more slides, so let me, and some of them aren't necessary, but some are more interesting than others. So I think I'm just gonna try to open them all up and then see if I see. So if you want to talk a minute or two while I prepare these.
Sure, just looking at some statistics here. Just to give people an idea, the Spanish flu pandemic lasted 2 years and killed 50 million people, which is about 68,400 a day. Coronavirus has been around for at least 2 months, and there's only been 64,000 deaths. So keeping in mind that 57 million people die per year of natural causes, which is about 156,000 a day. So it doesn't really seem like that bad, but again, it depends on how serious it is.
It would have been like the Spanish flu, besides for the shutdown, because I mean, there at some point there were shutdowns during the Spanish flu and social distancing. But what they're saying is that they were scared, or even that they were certain that it would have been like that had we not, taken the precautions that we're taking.
It's possible. There's no control group in a situation like this, but if it's as bad as the Spanish flu, we've actually done a very good job containing it, haven't we? In spite of everything. But I mean, that really remains to be seen, because a lot of this data is coming out from questionable sources, and you're hearing a lot of conflicting reports. Nurses saying hospitals are actually empty and things like that. So it's hard. It's really hard to say, honestly.
Well, I mean, at this point, the hospitals are full in my area. Saying there's over 500 people have died. Although, if you look at the statistics, but saying no, I mean, the hospitals in my area in Detroit, when we mentioned it, in January when the stories burst in China, I was like, well, okay, like I'll think about it in a few months. What's the likelihood that it's going to get all the way to the other side of the world here in Metro Detroit? But like, no, I mean, it is here now in Metro Detroit, and they're already building temporary emergency hospitals because the hospitals are overflowing.
Right. I'm just saying there are people making videos saying the hospitals are empty. I'm not saying I can validate these videos, because it's hard to do, but there are out there. So it's causing, it's the problem is that it's causing confusion, and people, what reason do we have to trust certain groups of authorities, right? I mean,
well, there's a lot of distrust, but I don't think there's any doubt that there's, I don't think there's too much of a doubt that, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people now are dying from the exact same disease. And, now you already have names, like so in my area, you have names and stories of, daily of these people that are dead. And, I'll just show,
I'm not trying to mock the dead. It's just more of a commentary on the lies that have come out, and hoaxes and so forth. And, people are suspicious, and they're just quick to assume the worst. And I mean, I can't validate data directly, so I don't want to jump to any conclusions. And just, say it like it is. I mean, we have to kind of wait and see what comes of everything. But I mean, the death rate is quite low, you have to admit.
Well, I mean, compared to the Spanish flu, and it's saying they're predicting that the coming weeks are going to be the worst ever. That what we're seeing now is just preparation for these numbers that are going to be daily and going to be increasing across. So at this point, if you believe the experts, you're saying that So I have a friend in New York, photojournalist, sometimes sells pictures, and he's been taking pictures in the streets of New York to show what's going on. But you mentioned, he's got pictures of these, like, hospitals and, dead bodies filling up and things. So this is already 3:12 in New York in Chinatown, where you had people starting to wear masks, and this was before the government advisory, where he's already starting to document just people wearing masks, and ironically, in Chinatown is one of the first places. And you have March 19th, after the lockdown, kind of doing these distancing weddings still. Then on the 21st, you start having triage and special places being set up outside of hospitals, tents for checking people, testing stations. So many people, God forbid, sick and worried that they have coronavirus. God forbid someone getting arrested for, I don't even know, but I guess this procedure of taking a swab, it actually goes down quite a bit. So like you stick it through your nose. It's like a really long Q-tip that like bends, and so it is I don't know, called painful, but like quite irritant to have this thing go all the way through the back chamber in your nose and down into your throat, through your nose to get a little swab. But people in New York were lining up for these tests. This was on March 21st, and you can already see people in New York starting to wear masks. So March 25th is the setting up of a makeshift morgue at Bellevue Hospital. We already had the National Guard come in, and they're setting up a special morgue for the dead bodies. Cool tents. So these makeshift morgue tents with the ability to hold 3,500 dead bodies outside of Bellevue Hospital. Some of the cooled chambers to refrigerator trucks to serve as overflow morgue. So like that picture, members of the National Guard carrying tent posts like giant crucifixes. So it's still March 25th. Discarded medical equipment. Okay, so March 27th, here's this wedding in Crown Heights where they can't have weddings already, so they're driving in a convertible and people are cheering on from the sidelines. Now, starting to see social distancing guidelines put in New York, March 27th. Stores, only people with masks can enter. Food distribution for people who are already locked down. Here you get pharmacy closed to the public, doing hand signals to take orders, price gouging on gloves and packages. Okay, so this is Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. Special tents outside for triage and possibly makeshift morgues and other things. Estimating 19 patients per hour died at that hospital. They had a really bad day. One patient per hour. About one person per hour is dying of COVID-19 in Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. This is the one President Trump mentioned because this is near where his father, where he grew up in. So you see that just pictures on the street, healthcare worker taking a quick cigarette break. Advertising for herbal immunity. Showing how facial masks. So this is already March 27th. Pictures. So get the. Okay, so here's March 29th now. So he's claiming that guy's a price gouger. He used to call himself Johnny Justice and do certain things. So the difficulty of social distancing in New York, even though people are wearing masks. These are the Chevri Kadisha, the people who deal with dead bodies for Jews and burial, as funerals have largely been canceled. And so now you just have like a few guys in hazmat suits taking a body and a handful of people standing on a street corner for funerals. There's also a funeral home. So, the Jews have been being hit hard in these areas. So there's just tons of funerals. And, at this point, at most, you're just going to get like a handful of people standing on a street as the car goes forward. So March 30th was when the Navy boat comes. And I guess you got right there to get de Blasio. Here's in Central Park, Samaritans, ultra Christian organization, building their field hospital. And it's got irony. The idiot photographer breaches the secure stale area of the field hospital to take photos. So I always appreciate this guy's photos. Pizza being delivered for medical workers. Sinai Hospital. Visitors now prohibited. A woman in gloves giving money to a panhandler. Social distancing. Here's the filming now. Funerals instead of usually cars. If you went funerals, you have like the long line of cars following each other that to go through traffic lights. So now they're just live streaming it, which I'm going to show some slides in some of the future. So just street life. The cops still giving tickets in their face masks. So here's Maimonides Hospital, where I used to volunteer in Brooklyn, and a lot of difficulties there. And I didn't get to these pictures yet, so I think it was more funerals. So God forbid, brought a microphone and announced that the funeral procession will not begin until everybody spreads out. So now people are taking these guidelines much more seriously than they were a few weeks ago, especially as Orthodox Jews are, God forbid, dying en masse. So these pictures were from yesterday that I didn't even see yet. Okay, so just showing you, like, that's New York. Those dead bodies aren't, like the hospitals are filling up. There's dead bodies. In terms of the numbers, like, is it as bad as they're warning? Is it, these things are debatable, but certainly, we have a crisis in large amounts of deaths, and that seems pretty indisputable. Are you there, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I just got so much stuff. Okay, so I have some slides more to cover. A lot, just a lot of information related. So maybe try to just get through some of these smaller ones. That one was interesting from India. Just to get a little bit of a perspective on various things that might be impacted, and some interesting ideas that I found from various things. So that one's pretty good. The reports on like how it's affecting internet traffic and app usage and various sectors. Okay, so here's a quick one. How is COVID-19 transforming global e-commerce industry? Coronavirus hit hard business across industries, including travel, retail, multiplex. Stock markets have shrunk, while e-commerce has shown tremendous growth amid the COVID-19 outbreak, with demand for food delivery, e-learning, driverless delivery, entertainment skyrocketing, but supply chain disruptions as production operations remain shut could severely cut short the e-commerce boom. Here's an inquiry into the repercussions coronavirus pandemic has had on global finance so far. China's economy slide. E-learning, however, accumulates $3.2 billion. That with schools closed, teleeducation has become a safe resort for millions of students to study online, causing a surge of $1.7 billion in Zongbang's net worth. New Oriental's founder Yu Minhong's wealth rose by $190 million. Another person from the online education sector, seeing his wealth grow by $1.3 billion, is Chen Xingdang of GSX Techidu. Travel industry, biggest loss, smartphones have dropped, sales have dropped by 55%. Tourism, global decline. So, why smartphone sales are down so much. Maybe just less spending. People have less certainty to spend such money on something like that. Changing business behavior. International stock market crashes. Online shopping, so social distancing. There's been a lot of older people have been avoiding online shopping, so social distancing measures could have been the catalyst to eventually push people forward. Consumerism and businesses. Further increases in e-commerce, retailers suffering the most. So things going online. A lot of these are relatively obvious, although say the fear of the supply chain, because e-commerce, the product has to get to the person. You can't everything be done over the internet. So prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, it was pegged at $712 billion, and it's being readjusted lower. So because of the supply chain disruption, even though a lot of things being switched to e-market, that the e-market in general is still expected to decrease, although see the other ones that the overall trend will still be down, but there'll be a lot of sectors like in the McKinsey study that will be profitable. So despite borders shutting foreign travelers and enforcing strict quarantine measures, COVID-19 transmission shows no signs of recession, showing how difficult it is to contain the virus. As a result, China's industrial output has shrunk by 13.5% than it used to pump into global supply chains. Annually, a 20% plummet in retail sales shows how despairing the global financial landscape is. Okay, so let's just first overview slides. This one was interesting. I picked this one. I thought you might like this one, Jennifer, because this one's out of India. You're talking about job loss, business closures, and stability versus prosperity. So, this professor who made these slides saying most Indians are reasonably selfish and self-centered throughout history. This has been the main reason for a lack of cohesion, subpar growth, development, and widespread poverty. Currently, a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon. COVID-19 hands to determine the outcome. Two scenarios, pessimistic and optimistic. So pessimistic, job loss and business closure. India opens after controlling COVID-19 within April 2020. Gloom and gloom all around. Micro, small, medium, large businesses scramble to survive. Easiest way out, reduce manpower, widespread job losses, joblessness. Millions of jobless people, including workers, facing basic survival and helplessness. Each jobless person will unconsciously impact the minds and morale of at least 10 to 20, 30 more people, impacting buying patterns. So just, downward spiral of low consumption and negative economic things, 10 to 30% of all small, big businesses could face permanent closure. Huge stock market fluctuations, making things like savings difficult. Biggest recession ever, 3 to 5 years to come out of this slump caused by COVID. So summary, job losses, pessimism, reduced buying power, reduced consumption, more job losses, failed individuals, failed business, ruined economy, 3 to 5 years. Optimistic, stability and prosperity. Everybody believes that things are as they were before the lockdown. They treat the lockdown period as a vacation, time off with family, positive to go back to normalcy all around. The good planning, stabilized, reduced, resume normalcy. Not big morality, joblessness claims. Businesses able to repay their money in time and get back on their feet. And so the optimistic, no job losses, spread of optimism, sustained buying power, unaffected consumption, sustained individuals, sustained businesses, stable and resilient economy. So the driving factor, and then he has certain recommendations for the government and various factors of essential, how to keep things going, bank, and these are the most educated slides, and it doesn't mention too much specifically out of India, but I just thought I'd show, people from all around the world are basically thinking about the same thing. How is it going to affect their economy long term? Besides for the medical, obviously the medical situation, but the medical situation is just one of the factors of many. So anything you want to add, Jennifer?
Oh no, but I like that that slideshow. It was pretty neat. That was sort of culturally different.
Yeah, I figured I'd throw them off with a few just information hitting from different areas around the world and different angles. So here's the COVID traffic report of the effect on web, mobile, and IRL traffic in March 2020 from Emerging Tech Morning Brew. Many companies experience sudden upward and downward swings in usages in their services. So outline the web, general internet traffic patterns by metro area. Then you have mobile and IRL. So the web, internet usage across the board has spiked, but so far networking infrastructure has held up. Though service providers and internet companies are showing signs of strain, they're also adding capacity, quantifying the surge. Comcast, who I use, that's why I'm getting my internet through Comcast Xfinity. That's how you're seeing Doooovid right now. As the U.S. largest home internet provider, says peak traffic has increased 32% overall and 60% in some areas since March 1st. Video streaming consumption's up 38%. Gaming downloads are up 50% and 80% for new releases. Video conferencing and voice over internet have jumped up 212%. VPN traffic is up 40%. Daytime and nighttime patterns are shifting. Comcast says downstream peak is moving from 9 p.m. to 7 to 8 p.m. Upstream peak is moving from 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. in most markets. So, obviously people aren't working the regular 9 to 5 hours in their home. And so the time people are using internet. So Nokia and other providers seeing similar trends, huge increase in video conferencing and games, biggest increases in gaming. So even with quarantine, mobile traffic is surging. AT&T, 40% increase in mobile traffic and 100% increase in Wi-Fi calling. Verizon, similar, your daily averages of text messages, 9 billion text messages a day, 33% increase in call duration, call volume, 2 times the call volume of Mother's Day. So Telecom Italia reported 70% spike in network traffic. Spanish carriers, 40% increase. So pretty much across the board, pretty interesting here. So people are working from home, less travel. So urban and suburban patterns have flipped, where maybe people, now they're working from home. So there's more usage in the suburbs and urban areas. So instead of going to work and working, everyone using the computer, massive internet in a place of business, they're doing it more in the suburbs. City networks are generally holding up. Some network degradation in 200 cities, but nothing major. So if you see the week before, most of the 200 cities held up fine to the increasing demand. Traffic momentum by category. So online travel, hotels, airlines, cruise line, rental car service, corporate travel, event, way down. I mean, not way down, but actually way down. So you see those are all way down, but the amount those are down, huge increase by like 400% in grocery delivery, and web conferencing over 1,000% increase. Here you have web conferencing, Zoom, 1,000% increase. Meet, Google Meet, 500% increase. BlueJeans.com, I don't think I ever used that, 300% increase. GoToMeeting, 200% increase. WebEx, 100% increase. Meet.link.com. So it's interesting. All of those are having increased traffic, but I haven't heard of a lot of these video chat services, so maybe interesting to check some of those out. Video apps by country. So here you have Hangouts, House Party, Microsoft Team, and Zoom in the various colors. So Hangout, 30 times more downloads. So I mean, just the people downloading these apps increasing by thousands of percents. Unemployment, traffic isn't limited to lockdown states. Traffic's increasing even in places that aren't locked down. Social media is up. Messaging on Facebook's up 50%. Snapchat video, Twitch, gaming vastly increased. You know, I'm playing more chess. Streaming, elephant in the room. So people are streaming Netflix the most. I think Netflix in some cases have been reducing bandwidth, but everyone, YouTube, Hulu, Amazon is increasing. So then you got mobile. More mobile time, less mobility. So you can see increased usage, but you could also see decreased travel, especially travel apps. Business casual. It's a podcast. So grocery shopping online. So just a huge increase in people grocery shopping online. So food delivery apps, for whatever reason, isn't having the huge increases. Uber Eats, maybe because the less safe having food delivery as opposed to grocery delivery. So it's interesting. Dining out is not an option. So all these servers are taking huge hits. Mobility services, huge hits. So IRL, so huge decreases in the amount of driving people are doing. I'm definitely driving, 10-20% as much as I used to. Basically, I just go to shopping a few times a week and to my mother. Truck traffic holidays steady. So freights. So long haul trucks are maybe increasing. No, even those are decreasing. So look at all this, the parking apps. So just, various things. So sort of air traffic, sub riderships, plummeting. Airbnb has adjusted their new reality. So they had huge reservation declines, especially in affected areas. I guess you would play that clip of your viral clip of the Airbnb, except maybe where people are fleeing, people are trying to get to safer areas, so they might actually be having increased usage. The amount of movement, I guess, tracking movement of people. So a lot of places hardly any movement at all. Distancing different in different areas. I guess gyms affected in different areas to a larger effect. Some places the gyms are closed and taking huge hits. Fitness studios moving online. I noticed that on Facebook. These yoga studios have online classes. Maybe Church of Entropy will revive her online yoga. Alcohol. Bars are down. the places that are associated with alcohol sales are decreasing, although I'm not sure if I mentioned alcohol sales in and of itself. So just interesting factors to think about. Changing the app market. Want to add anything, Jennifer?
No, I'm not sure what to say.
Yeah, there's not much to say. So I just present the information. We could comment. I mean, all this is discussable, but there's just so much information. So this one's pretty interesting. This slideshow, coronavirus will change the world permanently, and some interesting takeaways that might things that are happening differently now that might permanently change. So President Trump keeps on mentioning like getting rid of handshaking in general, and even like flu deaths, that if we got rid of handshaking, probably only like half as many people would die from the flu each year. So how will the coronavirus change the world? So I think this from an Italian technologist from Pietro Leo. So government, global economy, health, science, lifestyle, tech, community, and election. So government institutions will go virtual. Stronger and functioning role of governments will rise. New civic federalism will rise to attach climate change and address economic isolation. Unchangeable rules will be changed. Referring the true will pay. Expect political uprisings. Elections, at-home voting might become the new norm. Permanent voting platforms could become wide adopted. Global economy willing to pay more. The right and more restraints for mass consumption. Mini baby boom. Stronger domestic supply chains and rising cost. Inequality gap will widen. Health science. Points of care will change. Homes will be the first hotspot. The raise of telemedicine. Family caring is the center. Going beyond patient-centric. Need for huge public investments to preserve our health and develop drugs and less pure market-driven approach. Trust in scientists, at least in a public health and epidemics, will be partially restored. Lifestyle, more voice technology to control entryways and security. More willing to carefree entertainment and diversions to go away from standard habits. This could push economy quickly rebounded and flourish. Homemade food, less commuting for restaurants, more investment in public parks and big cities. Society ready to accept changes. Community, more spirituality, more social with sense of community and interdependence. More knowledge and science-driven citizenship. Some of this more be fantastical. Tech, regulatory barriers to access online will fall. Health education, working online will be much easier. Online digital lifestyle will evolve. Virtual reality will be the key tool. Will create new forms and experiences of support. Live stream shopping and entertainmers. So I never heard that one. Entertainmers. So all these are arguable, but just interesting things to think about. So personal becomes dangerous. I was mentioning like the air becoming toxic. So I encourage people to read through. There's a lot of interesting thoughts on this, like a new form of patriotism. What does it mean to be a patriot, like in terms of medicine, as opposed to war heroes, medical heroes, possibly a decline in polarization. You could argue all these things from the other side. This like alt-right commentary, and people maybe arguing the other way. Return to faith. So these are less interesting things to read through. These things I kind of read through a lot of these things, but a lot of these things will likely change. Rise of telemedicine. My dad's doing telemedicine now. He does hospice. FaceTime, when FaceTime first came out, and I tried to show my dad and my mom. They never used it, but now my dad is using telemedicine for his job. So the adaptation level, what it takes to succeed in the new world, the people who succeed through this, likely those changes will end up, if they're not permanent, they'll permanently be changed. So all these, have interesting things to read through. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on some of these, possibly permanent changes in society of and I mentioned in the Facebook message that this could be kind of like a mini punctuated equilibrium here of what's going on.
I think it's more like an unplanned vacation almost. People are pretty overworked and stressed out in general, and it's sort of like it's pretty, I don't know, what's the word, sudden, jarring change of pace for a lot of people. So just that fact of having lived through such a change in pace, I think, is going to change people's views, which is going to change the culture to some extent. It's hard to say exactly how much there, but it's going to depend what happens going forward. It'll definitely be different.
I'm not going to show the slides on like how to make money, good investment opportunities during this. But I mean, likely we see an increase in the wealth gap and knowledge gap, possibly the increase in a welfare state, things like UBI ideas that were, unfathomable, now are, people are expecting to get checks soon. I'm going to have slides on that versus, the people who have a stake, the people who own property, who own businesses, who run institutions, and that strengthen their institutions, that those institutions survive and thrive and prosper, and what those institutions did to make it through this, and that those things will likely make them stronger to outlast. And there could be a coalescence of power among institutions that were successfully able to adapt some of these new strategies that are tried out during this period. So for a lot of people, it may be like a vacation, but a lot of people, and so I have quite a few bit more, slide shares here. You could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 left. So, but I guess I'm like 70% done because I had over 20 slide shares and, the articles. So there's some good examples of, let me just try to pound through some of these. So here is coronavirus impact on the app industry, which I showed a little bit when before. So these are specifically, we looked at another slideshow that had some of these, but let's see if I think this one might have more information. So we've seen this, the effect on airline, but things like gaming and various fields are being either negatively or positively impacted. Just the search keyword for coronavirus. So tourism been affected. In-depth look at 2 adapts in the travel category to see more detailed insights of Uber and Air Canada. Uber, one of the biggest in the market, was affected by the consistent spread of the coronavirus. Uber was preserving its overall rank despite the news about the outbreak. So after the national emergency, see the decline in, not sure actually what that chart is measuring. Air China's graphic, TripAdvisor. It's uses various apps that are negatively affecting, although medical apps. So new one like Babylon. So if you're actually like investing in things like that, like you could look, or just looking at the trends in society. So what apps are doing good or bad. Babylon is some form of telehealth. Food and drink. Almost all restaurants and coffee shops are forced to shut down. Many moved to either carry out or delivery, third party. Ranking of apps offering delivery services: Surge, Starbucks, Instacart, Walmart. Started off affected negatively by the viruses. Rankings dropped from 25th to 229th in 10 days. People have different priorities in their everyday lives because of the outbreak. So Starbucks, hard to see how they're going to do, but Instacart, grocery delivery and pickup service, ranking is up from 563rd to 66. So, the app of Instacart has surpassed Starbucks. Starbucks had been the 25th most popular app, and now it's less popular than Instacart. Walmart, is now the third most popular app. People want to do online Walmart shopping. It's third most popular app. Ritual, popular app for food pickup service in Canada, slowly declining. So educational category. So a lot of these apps are doing quite good. Google Classroom is now became the fifth most popular app from over 300. When I use Google Classroom, Ding Talk, a Chinese version, doing very well. Lingo Kids, these apps I've never heard of, but you can see they're make sense. So House Party, Snapchat-like service, various social networking categories, new social networking apps are doing very well. Family tracking, unneeded, everyone's staying at home. Dating, decreasing. Some dating apps are trying to mitigate this by encouraging messaging, and so people can't actually go on the date, but they can still connect and meet. The business category. So Zoom became the #1 in business and #2 overall of all apps. So Zoom right now is the #2 app overall. I guess Walmart is #3. Slack also. I have a Slack account for chess, but I guess Slack is more popular in Europe. Playing with people from Europe. So pretty interesting here. I'm not familiar with a lot of these apps. I know at the Hindu temple, the Hare Krishna temple, I've been for a while. A lot of app programmers. But one of the effects of social distancing is I don't get to talk to my friends, and otherwise, I'm sure they would be able to inform me on these. But so pretty interesting, a more in-depth look at the app industry. I'm not sure if you're a big app user, or but it's pretty interesting indicators.
I don't actually own a phone, so I don't have any apps. I'm a bit of a Luddite that way, but I know people really like the apps, the Candy Crush and so forth. I guess I haven't seen the need for it yet.
Well, if you're in a big city or you have to make financial, you're ordering. So I mean, if you're dealing with large amounts of people in a dense area, apps become increasingly important. And also from a business perspective, like if you're running a company and your company needs an app or various things, or if you're in the Hindu community, that's what a lot of people do. They make apps. So here's another kind of like cultural predictions. I don't know where I found this. They're calling Backlash. Mina, I guess, Remy Abloh, head of strategy so a trigger, for example, women are now allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. So a trigger says, so we're talking about certain cultural things, cultural triggers, and we talk about possible cultural triggers triggered by COVID-19. So I guess this came from the United Arab Emirates. So so it's pretty interesting. So disciplines that highlight the latest shifts in culture, news, events, initiatives, trending hashtags, inventions, brand communications, we call them triggers because they trigger something in culture. They're often called a prerequisite for emerging cultural trends. The emergence of new trends is something we call edges, as they aren't necessarily established yet, but are definitely emerging and growing. So, for example, e-learning, trigger the edges of e-learning, certain advantages. So this, there's 40 slides. I'm not going to go through all of them or even most of them, but it's these various things of social triggers that have changes and possible the upside that could come from how we're going about doing things like e-learning. Families are forced to use technology, survivalism, so the gym, the benefits of gyms being closed, here's an important concept. Big Brother is watching you, and the special governmental ability to declare national emergencies and use all these governmental powers. Could possibly polarization, survivalism, going solo, being self-sufficient, lack of planes flying. You got Ramadan. Instead of the largest shopping mall in the world to e-commerce. So there's so much to do. I'm just going to encourage the people to look at these, because a lot of these are duplicated. But so this one is from the United Arab Emirates, and they're looking at societal changes. They're calling them triggers, and things that might have positive and negative sides to them, and how that might influence things in the future. So here's one on food manufacturers. Okay, so let's look at this one. Milestone, marketer's roadmap for challenging times. So what about marketing during this period? The slideshow from this group, Milestone, some of their customers. So CRG, what do they call that? Care, recovery, growth. So this was from a webinar they did. Crisis, conserve, adjust, engage, recovery, working, the new normal, growth, back to the game. And talking about keeping your businesses vital, adjusting to switching to online, adjusting to different market trends, case examples, other ones that are, we go more in depth into case examples of companies that successfully managed in China or various different places, or ways to benefit from going online. So a lot of this kind of duplicated information, but so this is a marketing firm that is advertising to their clients to help them get through this. So here's more supply chain for food manufacturers, the effect of COVID-19 on food manufacturers and the supply chain. This is Aaron Bolshaw, VP of Marketing for Safety Chain. Okay, so just kind of see what's happening, perspective and size. The U.S. food system undergoing an extremely rapid shift from food away from home to food at home purchases. Lessons from the Great Recession. People spend less money on food when economic times are tight. Different now because a recession area, but people are hoarding because of catastrophe. In terms of the Great Recession, there wasn't really this hoarding fear of collapse, although you did have food insecurity. Different spending. How much do people spend at home or away from home? And will those dynamics change where people are spending more at home? As of now, we've been spending more in both categories. Both categories are increasing. Could there be increase in food prices due to food insecurity? And I guess in 2008, that did eventually lead to food insecurity and price increases. Although, because oil prices are low, there might be multiple factors. Restaurant attendance obviously weighed down. Supermarket and general merchandise stores, are they going to be affected? Will we be able to maintain the supply chain? So far, it seems so. Various projections. Foot traffic visits increase or decrease. So those are based on area. And here you have stores. Starbucks, so huge decrease, but Home Depot even increase, Walmart about even. Things that we talked about with immigration, labor availability, H-2A program for farmers, what we're going to do about that. What about imports, international? What are things that we import? Sugar and tropical products, horticulture, livestock. So especially important for fruits and vegetables. I know I like cherries and a lot of things that come from California, but a lot of them come from South America or Central America, or even the Far East. Things that I like. Sort of like avocados and so just where things are coming from. China, obviously the biggest exporter. EU exporters decreasing. Impact on restaurants. And manufacturers. Impact, travel. Certain areas are not, different factors in these various, restaurant and manufacturing industries are affected more than others. So the science of logistics, don't have that much time to get into. So, here things, food assistance programs, federal funding, I have more slides on those, and various things of, the federal government saying that it'll promote the agricultural industry. President Trump talking to the head of all the various companies and food manufacturers, could be, corporations are actually going to increase their power, delivery online. So interesting, more information, trying to, just been at it so long, and trying to pound through the rest of these slides. You got 6 left. So let's look at this one, scaling up country readiness and support for COVID response from the World Health Organization. So you got 8 pillars: operations, support and logistics, case management, infection prevention and control, national laboratories, country level coordinating, planning and monitoring, risk communication and community engagement, surveillance, rapid response and case investigation, and points of entry. So country-wide coordinating, you have high-level actions, top-down for country-level coordinating, multi-sectorial, multi-partner coordination mechanisms to support preparedness and response. Just a lot of these are logistical, managing type things. Anyone's ever worked in management or has probably seen these type checklists and recommendation things. So they're putting kind of like levels, level 1, 2, and 3 actions of what needs to be done. Incident management teams, getting spokespeople, operation review. So I guess I'll put this in the chat, and hopefully people will have time to read some of this. And it's actually too long for the chat, sorry, but see if you wanted to see that what is life after coronavirus, how to claim. Sorry, X that out. Okay, so this one, hopefully this one will fit in the chat, and I'm not going to read through most of this, but here is how to claim Small Business Association Disaster and Care Act loans, the new $2 trillion stimulus package, and these various things. How do you borrow money? How do you get grants from the government? What are the various programs? So these are kind of bureaucratic. There's numbers. My father, for his medical office, might be going through this. A lot of people, if you have a business, this is very important, and a lot is bureaucratic. You have to fill out the right form and meet the qualifications, and know what program. So anybody who is a person of means in the West or anywhere in the world, will have to know how to get through this bureaucracy. If you're just a person hoping you're going to get your $1,200 check, that also is going to be partially bureaucratic, and all, the factor of, of the increased welfare state and who benefits from the welfare state, and you need to be signed up, be interesting. So the 504 loan program for companies with strong credit, the multi-million-dollar company, a paycheck protection program, max loan limit at $10 million rate, for large businesses that are trying to pay their employees. So there's a lot of information here. We might look into this as this goes on, but disaster loans, eligible businesses. I just wanted to have some of this information out there. It's important if people, my mother is like, listening to conference calls directly from the bank or whatever. If you actually need to get a loan or do something like that, it'll be different. But I wanted to give a little bit of that information, so I'll do this one while I'm at it, and pounding right through. And so tax and business update. This one's with them, consultants. So here's the SBA assistance program, and the Emergency Act, and these things are kind of logistics. So I'm not going to go through it. I put it in the chat. I encourage people, in his different areas, people to look into it. Claire's here; she's a lawyer. Maybe she'll look into it. Obviously, this is America, not England. And if you're, doing business law or type things, this is extremely important. But for your average person, it may not actually be applicable to them at all. So, one of three more. So here's an interesting marketing in the time of crisis. So, what about marketing? This is actually from out of India. So people are trying to raise awareness around coronavirus, obviously the most important issue. What does it mean for, marketing? So planned purchasing are being deferred, vacations, automobiles, goods, apparels, all these things that people are just postponing. They'll get it later. Real estate, investment schemes, insurance products. So brands should, be trusted source of accurate information, attack the crisis and demonstrate that it can be fought, be practical and help consumers in their everyday life. So, certainly 71% said, don't exploit coronavirus to promote your brand. However, show that you're helpful in the new everyday life, inform about your efforts to face the situation, and should offer a positive perspective about what you're doing to confront coronavirus and how you're going to be able to, deliver the value to your customer during this pandemic. So LinkedIn survey, 43% are now working remotely, 52% are doing more calls on video and phone, 44% of senior leaders are more likely to make remote work policies permanent. 54% of senior leaders report their companies are implementing virtual events as a result of the outbreak, and 45% say that this is somewhat or very likely going to be a more permanent shift. 36% say they're more productive when they're working from home. Okay, so spike, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, what's up? Show that in other slides. So branding with empathy. Keep a simple message. Update the social media handles. Make sure everything's updated. Stay topical. Stay relevant. Have reminders like social distancing, and how whatever you're doing is taking into account these necessary procedures. Maybe even change logos. Some places have changed the logo during this crisis. How is what you do relevant to the coronavirus situation. Keep it human. So interesting thing, I'm not going to go through the rest of that because I'm losing my energy. So here I want to do one, informative one, rational use of personal protective equipment during COVID outbreak. And just a few things here, you kind of say from level A to level D, what's needed, to the various equipment and who needs it, and even if you're a hospital at the levels of risk, we talked about the Jackpot in China and the level 1, 2, and 3, and what type of protective equipment or just for home. So there's a lot of information out there, but I'll attach those slides in the chat. And finally, the last one, and here's crisis management in China. This was interesting, inspiring business cases during the COVID-19 and SARS crisis. And this is from Daksu Consulting, and their values. You can see international companies, PayPal, and different clients from around the world that they consult. So look at some inspiring crisis management cases during COVID-19, and also looking back to the SARS crisis and some key takeaways. So some of these were really interesting. So this would be a good one to close on. Crisis management: be socially conscious, effective external communication, long-term planning, care about employees, continuous internal communication, quick response. So changing landscape, some numbers for the area in China. So here's some learned lessons. The impact of COVID-19 on Didi. Didi is the world-leading mobile transportation platform, offers a full range of app-based transportation services for 550 million users worldwide. Decrease in stair price, 45% drop, higher operating costs, policy issues with intervening government, sharp decline in the number of passengers. So what did Didi do? They established a rigorous prevention system, set up offline prevention station, introduced intelligent epidemic prevention QR code, had free coronavirus insurance for passengers, taking insurance for drivers, more stuff that they did, free transit for medical workers, free digital technology support, introduced home delivery options. And the result of Didi's crisis management is positive feedback from society, strengthening Didi's brand image. Of early March, since the virus has been under control in mainland China, resident trips in major cities has increased by more than 30%. Didi gets recognition from the government and positive social reaction. McDonald's. So 90% of restaurants in China temporarily closed. McDonald's contactless delivery, in-store prevention measures, efficient communication mechanisms, donations, public offerings, social media. So won the respect of customers, and 3,000 offline stores operated as usual during the coronavirus outbreak, which may have minimized financial losses. So Xiaomi, mobile internet company focusing on research and development of intelligent hardware and electronic products. 2017 opened second world headquarters in Wuhan. So decrease in sales, negative impact offline sectors, shrinking inventory level, late work resumption. So what they do about it: online product launch event, prolonged warranty period, mail product repairs from home, 72-hour live streaming. They had, I guess, February 11th, they had a 72-hour live stream. Social responsibility, employee care, and as a result, their R&D sector 80% recovered. So JD.com, Chinese leading one-stop e-commerce platform, which was founded in 1988. SARS outbreak affected the country in 2003. JD's founder began selling products online after the SARS outbreak. So increasing demand of daily necessities, decreased demand of non-essential goods. So instituted contactless delivery, social things, donations, public image. As a result, JD made contributions to society, obtained good reputation, continued increasing technological development, and has been experienced continued business growth during this pandemic. Baidu, Chinese multinational technology company that provides various internet-related services and products, had a revenue decline, decrease in share value, dropped 42%. So leveraging big data to share real-time information, introduced online inquiry platform, free coronavirus insurance, textbook resources, and through that, Baidu became a resource for real-time information. Value of Baidu as information reporter has been highlighted, and the average DAU of Baidu app exceeds 20 million, a 10.4% growth compared to the same period in 2019, and recognized by a motor company. So Dongfeng Motor Companies Limited in Wuhan. So huge issues, demand and sales decline, operation issues. So show care to customers. So trial live streaming. The result performed well, and the sales volume increased by 4.5% compared to the period of the same last year. So relatively, even a car company was able to manage this hit right there in Wuhan. Luxury brands. Luxury brands are considered as images in the minds of consumers that are associated with high level of price. So impacted, shut down retail stores, decreasing suppliers' order quantities, cancellation of trips. A lot of people travel from Europe or international travel and buy luxury products, or postpone fashion shows. So live streaming, real-time interpretation, enhanced connection to clients, social responsibility. So luxury brand senior executive perception towards sales performance in the future. Relatively confident that luxury products will continue to sell despite changes in how the economy. So looking back to the SARS outbreak, it's interesting it mentions the SARS outbreak of 2003. So, Jack Ma, who, I showed the Jack Ma Foundation of Alibaba that put together, the free research portal and best practices. So Alibaba, business-to-business e-commerce. In 2003, Jack Ma sent an Alibaba employee to the 92nd Canton Fair in Guangzhou after the city had been recognized as a SARS epidemic zone. The employee was diagnosed with SARS after returning to Alibaba's headquarters in Hangzhou and working for several days. Many people blamed Alibaba for spreading SARS in Hangzhou, giving the company a bad name. It required a quarantine at Alibaba's headquarters. So in SARS, everyone had to work from home, internal apologizing, but led them to go online. And so Alibaba had a quick adaptation. Service was not suspended. SARS crisis witnessed Alibaba's fight to overcome great challenges, which made Alibaba's team more committed than ever. 17 years ago, Alibaba was a relatively small enterprise. Now it's China's largest internet company with 3.89 trillion RMB market value. And a lot of these things that put Alibaba into a good decision was due to this disaster during the SARS outbreak, where Jack Ma had sent one of their people to an infected area, and that brought the infection back to their area. So that disaster led them to make those changes back in 2003 that have served them well. So very interesting here. So we got the CTRP. CTRIP has grown to the largest hotel distributor online travel agency in China. So obviously travel, plummeting turnover. This was back in SARS. This outbreak. So how did they respond to it? Reduce operational cost, temporary alternatives, motivate employees, promise to not cut jobs, training, spend the time training staff, improving business processes, and the result of the crisis management, strong rebound after the epidemic, highest share price ever after the epidemic, and leading to a successful IPO eventually on the NASDAQ. Procter & Gamble, P&G, I'm not sure if that's Procter & Gamble, maybe a Chinese company, something different. So P&G entered China, so does Procter & Gamble, has already been very successful. But the impact of SARS on them. So they were able to relatively predict the SARS outbreak and mitigate most of the damage by having a good emergency response system. This was already back in 2003. And as a result, they performed very well. So key takeaways of managing a public health crisis. Social responsibility. Donations matter. Taking your money in your benefit and giving it to people in need makes a big difference. Adapt marketing to new social needs. Helping people. Jack Ma, when facing crisis, we should not see it as an opportunity. Instead, we should consider what trouble people encounter and how we can offer help. So employees are crucial. Care about your employees, demonstrate the care for your employees during these troubled times. Consider investing in things like training and processes improvement. Adapt to new technology. Looking at 2003, how Alibaba adapted to new technology relating to the SARS crisis. Appeal to emotion, and provide consumers a sense of security. New selling channels, digital, new methods of getting your product to the customer, safeguarding customers. You may be looking to returning customers, upgrading, improving brand image. So it's very interesting. I thought that was one of the more interesting slide shares I was able to find. So with that, almost 3 hours is the conclusion of Doooovid's presentation. I guess I'll hand it over to Jennifer, and I'll even put the link in the chat. I don't know if Claire's the only one there. Spilcher, Momser, I'm not sure if you wanted to kind of just wrap it up, or if you wanted to talk a little bit, or maybe we could just save it for the week in review tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Doowovid. I appreciate it. It's always nice to see where things are going and what's on people's minds, And this is sort of like a meta-analysis training for me, because I get to see what's important to people through what they talk about in their research.
Even if it's just me and you for my study knowledge and just our continued collaboration, hopefully a few people in the chat. I wanted to give a kind of thorough overview of all these various things affected, and I'm spending more time researching the science, but like I said, I didn't think it paid for me to do kind of like a low level overview of virology or something like that, but I did want for just our collaboration, see what's the current state of evidence, what does science know about the virus, how it affects people, how it makes people sick, what does science know about viruses at all, what's its connection to things like entropy and the theory of evolution, what are the gaps in knowledge, and then because this is completely shut down large parts of society, just the overview, and now we're already close to a month into this. The shutdown here in my area has already been 3 weeks now, so we have quite a bit of information on how this is affecting all different parts of the economy, and saying, okay, if you were an investor, say, okay, like you want to make money, you want to run your business in the right way. It's okay, you're not necessarily like a profiteer or something who's trying to like hoard and gouge on price and face masks or something like that. But just looking at like Alibaba 2003, Jack Ma's embarrassment and SARS, but adapts his company related to that, or all these companies that were in China that were able to emerge better than before the crisis due to good strategy. And looking back at a lot of this material that had been around for decades on strategic planning for pandemics, epidemics, that only a handful of people have ever really looked at, to kind of like the overreaction, possibly the reliance on experts. So there's a lot of things to talk about. I didn't have so much expertise in this, but I just want to cover it. I wanted to make a stream, put it out there, for myself to go over, and for my own knowledge, and share with my streaming partner Jennifer, corroboration for relation to different ideas that we'll talk about tomorrow. So I guess if you don't have anything to add, I might just call it a night. And if anyone had a direct at Doooovid in the chat, I'll have to hopefully tomorrow or next few days, I'll timestamp this as usual, and read through the chat. So unless you have some closing words, Jennifer, I think maybe we should just call it a night, and we'll talk tomorrow, maybe like 8 o'clock.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks for hosting, and look forward to the next one. I guess there's nobody who's joined the link. Wanted to come on, say hi.
Claire Canops were there, but I don't know if they have too much to add to specifically.
Well, we can wait till tomorrow.
Topic.
I mean, it's all good. I can send the link.
Keep this completely topical on, so people that just wanted information on coronavirus would have a source. So I put that in. So I guess I'll end the stream. I greatly appreciate Jennifer joining us, Elise being here and monitoring the, modding the chat, and helping me out the few times where it's tough, when I do my public study sessions, to talk for hours and hours on end. And, tomorrow we'll do some pontifications and talk about a bunch of interesting things, more about entropy. And you could see the progress we've made, like, looking at that next strain type thing, where some of this loosely acquired information, like I'd taken courses on edX on various things, and genetics, and even epidemiology, but now having something useful where I'm studying it to kind of put together all these things in knowledge. So I was kind of proud of myself for figuring out that next train and the entropy and how to work that web page, and kind of also going further in the molecular biology, because I think our theories on quantum mind, it's really going to have to get to molecular biology and biochemistry, that we're going to have to be able to have working knowledge to go from not only like the virus here, we're talking about the atomic, the compound level of compounds of tens of atoms, like a base pair, which is made up of tens of atoms, versus quantum mind, where you're talking about subatomic particles. But at least this progress,
it's not subatomic, Doooovid. It's a light field. It's a light field that surrounds the molecules. So there's like a molecular field, which is just the electrons, and then there's a light field on top of it that it's submersed in. And that's what dictates the way that it evolves and changes with time. So you kind of have to see it as the way that it's caused is through this unseen photonic field. I can send you a picture of...
we'll talk about this more in the future. Yeah. I thought the benefit for
it'll be interesting.
Just the fact, like the virus, we're looking at macro, environmental change, global warming, species, mass extinctions, for deforestation, and economic factors, oil prices and change. And then we're looking like, let's look at one single virus. Let's look at the one, like the 20 some proteins that its RNA codes for in these streams. So you're going, from this pretty micro level, not quite the micro level of, what Jennifer is explaining, even to, how to understand the, what I called subatomic particles, but when you get below the atomic level, and
it's not below the atomic. There's nothing below the atomic level. I just sent you a picture of one of the photonic crystals of what it looks like, and it's essentially the effect of a photonic field being bound to a material array, and it really shows you here clearly what's going on in terms of this is like a cross section of a DNA molecule. I thought you might find that one cool. We don't have to go into it right now. I know you're probably tired, but yeah, you have to have an understanding of the geometry, because it's the light field that predicts the geometry, and then you can use the geometry to understand how everything moves around relative to each other. So a virus is just a special case of life. You got to just make sure you actually understand the life mechanism in the first place, and stuff like the DNA structure becomes a prediction of that more general model of photonic arrays. But we can go into that in a future stream, and I really look forward to it. Thanks to everyone in the chat for tuning in, and I'm really looking forward to the show tomorrow. I think we'll have some interesting takes, and I look forward to what everyone has to say, especially Doooovid. Thanks again for hosting.
Okay, you have a great night, everybody, and blessings, and stay safe during this crisis. Check back to the first stream we did 3 weeks ago that had a lot of the basic precautions on how the infection spreads and how to avoid being infected. And so the second week we recover even more for healthcare workers and things like how to wear masks and put on equipment. So I didn't want to repeat any of this stuff, but stay safe. And once you trust your knowledge level for how to stay safe during this pandemic and understand what's going on, then we look into positioning ourselves, post-pandemic, and to these triggers, so to say, cultural triggers that might have long-term changes. And so thanks for joining me, Jennifer. Have a great night, everyone.
Night.